Chapter 766. Military counselor did not answer Li Tianlan's question, nor could he. In fact, Li Tianlan had been in the desert for a year, but Qin Weibai had left Zhongzhou state. It was said that she had gone to Switzerland. This news had aroused all kinds of speculation in some small circles in Zhongzhou state. Both sides were not nameless pawns. Dongqing Wudi could come to the desert prison, Bai Qingqian could come, and so could military counselor. With Qin Weibai's power, if she wanted to go to the desert prison, there would be no difficulty. Xiao Mahai, who completely regarded Li Tianlan as his ancestor, naturally did not dare to disobey the mistress. Under such circumstances, Qin Weibai was far away from Zhongzhou state, which made people speculate about other possibilities. It was inconsistent with his deep feelings. Many people felt that this matter was a little interesting. Li Tianlan glanced at him, and did not continue to ask. He said casually, "Have you eaten? Eat something together? Yesterday a new batch of seafood arrived here. The chef's skills are passable. I know you can't stand being wronged here, eating delicacies every day." Dongqing Wudi said with a smile and shook his head slightly. The annual maintenance fee allocated by Zhongzhou state to the desert prison was just over 20 million yuan, which was a veritable public fund. Xiao Mahai took nearly a quarter of this money and used it as Li Tianlan's food expenses. Since Li Tianlan entered the desert prison, Xiao Mahai had hired more than 10 chefs who were proficient in different cuisines. Countless expensive ingredients, tobacco and alcohol were basically transported by air. A fighter jet near the prison was now responsible for this work. Xiao Mahai informed the nearest military region of the ingredients he needed, and then sent a fighter jet to the military region to fetch them. He was blatant and undisguised. The army headquarters and even the parliament had discussed the issue of Xiao Mahai's misuse of funds. More than one counselor even proposed to take Xiao Mahai down and let him go to Zhongzhou state for a talk. Xiao Mahai didn't care at all. He was clinging to Li Tianlan. The result of this was obvious. Xiao Mahai really didn't move. No matter how many attacks he suffered, no one could shake his position. "Let's go for a drink." Li Tianlan smiled. Dongqing Wudi hesitated, sighed slightly, shook his head and said, "Forget it. I have to go to the Beijiang military region. There is a meeting in the army headquarters in the evening. Time is tight. Maybe next time." Li Tianlan was slightly startled. He nodded and said, "All right. Then I'll go back too." The military counselor stood up. The three of them walked out of the prison gate. "Do you have any clues about the North Sea attackers?" Li Tianlan asked suddenly. Li Tianlan was naturally curious about the mysterious chosen one who really stood at the end of martial arts. "No." Dongqing Wudi shook his head. "It's like he disappeared completely. All the signs show that this person doesn't exist." He suddenly smiled and said, "This has almost become an unsolved mystery. It's also because of him that the dark world has been quiet during this period of time. Not to mention waves, not even a wave. Everyone is afraid to be the first bird to stand out and be killed by him. But since that day, there has been no news from him." Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows. He did have some doubts about that mysterious genius, but at the same time, he felt an inexplicable sense of familiarity. Every time he watched that video, he felt a sense of familiarity. Li Tianlan shook his head. In silence, the gate of the desert prison slowly opened, and the three of them were already surrounded by yellow sand. "Minister, take care." Li Tianlan stretched out his hand, his expression calm and serious. Dongqing Wudi took a deep look at him, shook hands with him, and turned to board the plane. The rotors of the helicopter whistled, driving the sand all over the sky, and flew higher and higher. Li Tianlan raised his head and watched quietly. The flying sand was bounced away by his sword energy and fell on the original terrain. It became a khaki tornado. Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes, quiet like a glimmer of light under the scorching sun in the desert. Xiao Mahai came over and asked cautiously, "Your Highness, what do you want for lunch?" "Serve the third dish." Li Tianlan turned around and walked into the prison. Xiao Mahai nodded. Li Tianlan had a special menu in the prison, which was divided into 6 types, from 1 to 6. There were 6 fixed dishes on each menu, and the other 2 could be matched at will. Menu number 3 was the dish of tianfu, with plenty of chili. Li Tianlan usually ate most of the dishes in menu number 3. The two walked back to the prison. Along the fine cracks all over the prison, he looked at the gate of the maze that really belonged to the scope. Li Tianlan thought for a moment and walked over. The prison guard had already opened the door with a respectful face. "You don't have to follow me," Li Tianlan said. "Go prepare the food and open a bottle of wine." Xiao Mahai nodded and wrote it down. He said softly, "Maotai or Wuliangya? Or red wine?" "Give me some of both," Li Tianlan said. Xiao Mahai nodded and turned to the kitchen. The narrow corridor of the prison was lit with faint lights that could confuse people's perception. Li Tianlan walked silently in the maze until he reached the enemy near the core area. What appeared in front of him was a narrow door. It was quiet inside the door. Li Tianlan waved his hand to call a prison guard and said lightly, "Open the door." This was not in line with the rules, but the prison guard did not talk nonsense. After entering the complicated password, he opened the prison door. With a slight sound, a simple room appeared in front of Li Tianlan. It was an ordinary single bed with a thick mattress that looked very comfortable. An old cup was casually thrown on the bed. There was a desk and a chair in the space of about 10 square meters. There was a lamp on the desk. The toilet was in the corner, and there were some books on a small cabinet facing the toilet. A white-haired old man, who looked to be in his 60s or 70s and wearing presbyopic glasses, was sitting at the desk and reading with the help of the faint light from the small window. Hearing the sound, he turned his head and looked at Li Tianlan with some doubts. "New cellmate." The old man stood up and frowned. "There should be single rooms here." He suddenly narrowed his eyes and said in a cold voice, "So I'm going to be executed. Make room for the newcomer?" Prisoners are rarely executed in the desert prison. It can be said that there is no death penalty here. Li Tianlan said lightly. "It's not that there is no death penalty, but that there is no need." The old man looked at Li Tianlan for a while and laughed. "Everyone who stays here is living a life worse than death. You look like you're quite relaxed," Li Tianlan said as he looked at the surroundings. "What else can I do?" the old man said quietly. He looked at the prison door that was still open, and then looked at Li Tianlan, seeming to find that Li Tianlan was dressed completely differently from the prisoners. "You are?" The old man was a little confused. "Prison guard?" "Not quite." "Prison management?" It was even more unlikely. He was too young. Was he here to accompany the big shots of the army headquarters to inspect the work? But why did he come to contact him alone? "From the standpoint of the prison, I can be regarded as your cellmate," Li Tianlan said, "but I live outside." "Outside?" The old man's eyes flickered and he tentatively said, "What if I stand in another standpoint?" Li Tianlan turned around and said calmly, "From another standpoint, I am your god." The old man suddenly raised his eyebrows. His eyes instantly became incomparably sharp. "God?" he asked. It was not a rhetorical question, but a question. "Who do you think you are, Your Highness?" Xiao Mahai's voice appeared at the door, interrupting the old man's sneer. "I just received a notice from the parliament. Deputy Prime Minister Hua Zhengyang, a member of the parliament, will come to the desert prison in a few days. He hopes to talk to you face to face," Li Tianlan said. "Arrange a time." "Okay." Xiao Mahai nodded, looked at the old man in surprise, and turned to leave. The old man's figure stiffened for a moment. He looked at the direction of Xiao Mahai's departure, and thought about the conversation between them just now. Zhongzhou State Member? Deputy Prime Minister Hua Zhengyang? Even if he didn't know who the current members of Zhongzhou State were, at least he knew Xiao Mahai, the warden. He raised his head stiffly and looked at Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan was also looking at him, expressionless. "Okay, God." The old man smiled bitterly. "What do you want me to do?" "I want to learn." Li Tianlan walked out of the prison and waved his hand. "Let's have dinner together." The old man followed Li Tianlan quietly. "What do you want to learn?" "How to be a successful leader," Li Tianlan asked. The old man froze and looked up at Li Tianlan. "Success. Success." He said it silently for a while, and then laughed at himself. "Do you know what you're asking?" Are you asking a loser for advice on the experience of success? Just because you failed, when you're closest to success. Li Tianlan said meaningfully. So I'm sure you can teach me a lot. The old man followed Li Tianlan with a blank face, and his eyes were in a trance. Li Tianlan stopped talking. He just quietly observed the old man, keeping his composure. Zhou Tong. This was a name that many people in Zhongzhou State had forgotten. This name might appear in history books as a negative teaching material for many years to come. But over the years, this name had completely disappeared in Zhongzhou State. But if time went back, more than a decade ago, this was one of the most powerful names in Zhongzhou State. He was a former member of Parliament of Zhongzhou State and the Speaker of Tianfu Province. If one were to be exact. In those days he was the main competitor of Li Huaqing, the current president of Zhongzhou State. What they fought for was not the position of president, but the position of crown prince. At that time, the academics was not as big as it was now, and Li Huaqing had almost no chance of winning. Everyone thought that Zhou Tong would reach the top. But just a month before the dust settled, when Zhou Tong's voice completely overwhelmed Li Huaqing's, when Zhou Tong was the closest to success, he came to the desert prison. That was the largest conflict between the academics and the Prince Group. At that time, Zhou Tong was one of the most important leaders of the Prince Group. If he hadn't competed so fiercely with Li Huaqing and had taken a step back, the Prime Minister of Zhongzhou State would basically have nothing to do with Qin Fangqing today. Even today, some of Zhou Tong's old subordinates and confidants promoted by him were still active in the Prince Group. And his son was now the Deputy Speaker of the Southwest Affairs, enjoying the treatment of the governor. Although he was not as dazzling as Zhou Yuanshan because of Zhou Tong, he was almost recognized as the successor of the big group within the Prince Group. Military counselor had already taken action in the outside world. So during this year in the desert prison, Li Tianlan naturally would not be idle. Chapter 767. Switzerland, Forgotten City. In the luxurious and exquisite office, a person in charge of the Lin clan's branch, who could summon wind and rain in the outside world, carefully retreated from the office with a respectful smile. Horsewoman stood at the door, looking at him silently and expressionlessly. The man, who looked over 50 years old, shook hands with Horsewoman with a warm smile, exchanged feelings, and then left contentedly. It was 9 o'clock in the evening in Switzerland. It was quiet in Forgotten City. Horsewoman looked at her watch, took out her mobile phone, and checked the schedule. After confirming that the boss would not receive other guests today, and that there was nothing else to deal with, she turned and walked into the office. Qin Weibai, dressed in a moon-white cheongsam, was sitting behind the desk, dealing with documents. She still had an exquisite and perfect face, but at this moment, her whole aura seemed to be changing silently. It was not a kind of maturity after experiencing wind and rain, but a kind of change from calmness to sharpness. She quietly flipped through the documents in her hand, with a calm and serious face. Her every move was with indescribable rationality and magnanimity. This picture was beautiful, but this aura was so strong that Horsewoman subconsciously ignored her appearance and gender. Every time this happened, Horsewoman would think of the master of Samsara Palace. Facing the current Qin Weibai was more and more similar to facing the former master of Samsara Palace. For half a year, Qin Weibai sat in the position of the patriarch of the Lin clan. Horsewoman witnessed with her own eyes that she was becoming more and more powerful. She did not have world-shaking force, but she had established enough prestige in the branch system of the Lin clan in the shortest time. This half a year was busy and fulfilling. Qin Weibai completely squeezed into the core of the Lin clan bit by bit, and became a veritable patriarch of the Lin clan. A month ago, Lin Fengting, who had stayed in Forgotten City for nearly half a year, took his luggage and went on a trip, which was enough to show that he was completely relieved about the situation of the Lin clan. South America has been very lively recently. Hearing the footsteps, Qin Weibai looked up at Horsewoman and said softly. Horsewoman was stunned, and thought of the head of the branch who had just left. Lin Buzheng. According to the genealogical records of the Lin clan, this branch had left the headquarters for nearly 200 years, and had been developing in South America. Lin Buzheng was already the 6th generation in charge of this branch. The Lin clan of South America was not considered the top wealthy family in the entire South American circle, but it had been firmly in the front line for many years. It was relatively influential in the top circle, and involved in more complicated fields. Some information flashed through Horsewoman's mind. She looked at Qin Weibai and asked, "South America?" Qin Weibai nodded and took a sip of water from the cup. Horsewoman was a little confused. Lin Bujing didn't need to ask the headquarters for help in South America, did he? Even if Lin Bujing was not the top figure in South America, he was at least close to the top of the pyramid. If it was something in South America, what on earth had he encountered that made him rush back to the headquarters to find Qin Weibai? There are some remaining questions about the Heroes Club. Qin Weibai stood up and stretched gently. Her graceful body suddenly showed a thrilling curve. She wore a cotton dress and moved her body in the office. She frowned and said, "Since the end of the chaos in Eastern Europe, there has been no new invincible realm expert in the Heroes Club. They have no leader, and their internal affairs have never been peaceful. This is a behemoth that dominates South America and North America. Its internal turmoil has also affected many fields in South America. The Lin family of South America has also been greatly affected." Horsewoman's eyes flickered and she did not speak for a while. This was the case. The problem was often encountered in the Lin clan. Or it could be said that it had often appeared in the past 6 months. As the patriarch of the Lin clan, there were not many things that needed to be busy under normal circumstances. But the key was that the Samsara Palace had forcibly turned the normal state of the Dark World into an abnormal state. In the chaos in Eastern Europe, more than half of the invincible realm experts on the divine and holy lists had fallen. Almost all the superpowers, including the Heroes Club, the Jiang family of South America, the Men in Black, the Fantasy World, the Shadow Throne, most of the superpowers were leaderless. The whole Dark World seemed calm, but the internal fighting had become more and more intense. Not only the Lin clan of South America, but almost all the branches of the Lin clan scattered all over the world were affected. Qin Weibai also took advantage of this matter to mediate and quickly established her prestige. In Horsewoman's impression, the Lin clan of South America seemed to have a problem a few months ago and was quickly solved. The Heroes Club. Is someone trying to integrate the forces of the Heroes Club? Is it the South American government or private? Horsewoman asked softly. It's the Jiang family of South America. Qin Weibai said. Horsewoman suddenly narrowed her eyes. Annexation. How can it be so easy? Qin Weibai shook her head. This is the most complicated part. What do you need me to do? Horsewoman asked directly. The Heroes Club belonged to South America and had a deep cooperative relationship with many South American governments. When they were leaderless, the South American government wanted to take the Heroes Club for its own use. Although this matter was sensitive, it was not unnegotiable. The worst result was to break up and negotiate, but they would not fight. But the Jiang family of South America was also a giant in South America. Once they annexed the Heroes Club, the two forces would unite. The Jiang family of South America would have the power to seriously threaten any country in South America, and no country would be willing to tolerate it. Once this kind of thing started, it was almost equal to a war. With the right opportunity, other forces would naturally not stand idly by. The whole South America would be in a mess. No wonder Lin Bujing hurried back to the headquarters again. Go to South America. Qin Weibai said softly. Meet Jiang Guochu in my name and talk to him. See his attitude first. If I'm not wrong, Jiang Guochu should have entered the invincible realm now. Horsewoman nodded, not surprised at all. In fact, before Li Tianlan and Jiang Shangyu appeared, Jiang Guochu had always been the youngest invincible realm expert in the Dark World. He had been stuck at this threshold for several years. Now that he was in his early 30s, it was almost natural for him to enter the invincible realm. I'll go now, Horsewoman said softly. She paused, her eyes flashed, and she said softly, if there is a chance, should we? Let's see his attitude first and then report to me. I hope he will remember one thing. Today, the #1 expert in the Dark World is still in the Lin clan. Horsewoman nodded, turned around, and left directly. Qin Weibai sat back at her desk and turned on the computer. There was a video file on the desktop that she had watched countless times. She moved the mouse and clicked on the video. In the picture, the Rolls-Royce was slowly approaching Mount Dibbing. The flawless young man got out of the car and looked at the calm Mount Dibbing with a cold expression. Qin Weibai stared blankly at the young man in the video and subconsciously touched her face. Her eyes were a little dazed and she whispered, "So is this a coincidence or an accident?" The phone suddenly rang. Qin Weibai was slightly shocked. She took out the mobile phone beside her and looked at the number. After hesitating for a while, she pressed the answer button. "What's the matter?" she asked directly in a light voice. "I went to the desert prison with Dongqing Wudi today, and now I just returned to Yuzhou." Military counselor's calm voice sounded on the phone. Qin Weibai's bright eyes flickered slightly and she whispered, "How is he?" "Very good, but also very bad," military counselor said. "Be more specific." Qin Weibai frowned. Military counselor hesitated. He subconsciously wanted to tell Qin Weibai about Li Tianlan's choice in martial arts. But when the words were on the tip of his tongue, he realized that Li Tianlan was not the person he had imagined. He could not understand anything about martial arts at all. He thought about how to phrase his words. After a moment of silence, he said helplessly, "You should go and see for yourself." Qin Weibai held the mobile phone in silence, and the expression on her dreamy perfect face was a little complicated. "He asked me today why you were hiding from him." Military counselor smiled bitterly. "I have nothing to say." Qin Weibai still did not speak, and she looked a little stubborn. Military counselor waited quietly for a long time before he said lightly, "Why? You obviously want to see him. What's the point of hiding in Switzerland?" "Who told you that I want to see him?" Qin Weibai's tone was cold. "You said it. You said that you are the same, and it's really the same. Since you are the same, then if you are the palace master, you must want to see him now," military counselor said calmly. Qin Weibai paused and continued to be silent. "What are you insisting on?" Military counselor chuckled. "Or, what are you hesitating about?" "I don't know." Qin Weibai was silent for a long time before she said softly. Her voice was a little hoarse. "You don't know if you love him?" Military counselor's tone was light without any taste. "I said that we are the same. I can't describe that kind of the same as you. To be exact, this kind of essence is exactly the same. I can even let her affect my thoughts. This is not hypnosis, but a natural reaction when facing myself. I don't know if I love him or not, or I love him, but I don't know if this is the result of her influence," Qin Weibai said calmly. "Excuses." Military counselor's tone was understated. "You." Qin Weibai raised her eyebrows. "He can affect you, and you can naturally affect him. You have been together for so long. When has the palace master ever changed her mind? The palace master hasn't changed, and you naturally won't change. So you are lying." Military counselor said slowly, "What on earth don't you know?" Qin Weibai took a deep breath and said softly, "He said he wanted to see me?" Military counselor was stunned and shook his head. "No, he just asked you why you were hiding from him." "He asked me why I was hiding from him." Qin Weibai laughed, and her voice was a little sad. "Are you sure that the me he said is really me?" Military counselor suddenly fell silent. Qin Weibai silently hung up the phone and reached out to gently cover her chest. Her heartbeat was rising and falling slowly, unusually stable, and an incomparably strong heartbeat was beating in sync with her heartbeat. But in addition, there was a third heartbeat beating slowly, extremely weak, but extremely real. Qin Weibai clenched her fists. Her face was pale, and her eyes suddenly became a little scared. Chapter 768. The night wind blew across Beihai. The lights on Mount Dibbing gradually dimmed. In the quiet world, Wang Shengxiao sat on the stage a formidable person, looking at the calm Beihai and subconsciously tightened his coat. It was October. When the weather in the south was just about to cool down, Beihai had gradually become cold. There was a pot of wine beside him, and the wine had already been emptied. His face was rosy, and his somewhat hazy and drunk eyes silently looked at the moonlight reflected on the surface of the sea. He was in a daze, and no one knew what he was thinking. He had been the patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai for more than half a year. After that world-shocking battle, Wang Shengxiao once again kept a low profile. He became more and more silent. He restrained all his sharpness, and the loftiness in the past seemed to have disappeared. He became more and more calm. Only the never-ending conscription in Beihai province could let people feel the power of the new patriarch of Beihai. The game with Zhongzhou state was still going on, but the compromise was done step by step. Following the North Sea Legion's compromise, a series of large-scale drills were held within the North Sea Legion. The hundreds of thousands of newly enlisted soldiers were undergoing special training every day before being thrown onto the drill field. After victory or defeat, they would undergo even more rigorous training. Beihai province seemed to be completely silent. But behind this silence, the atmosphere of the whole Beihai province became more and more iron-blooded. No one questioned Wang Shengxiao. That time, the whole Beihai saw Wang Shengxiao's attitude. Countless civilians of the North Sea province expressed sufficient support for the new patriarch. With the support of the people, the situation in Beihai gradually stabilized after many compromises. Although all of this was only temporary stability, for the North Sea province, it was an extremely rare opportunity to catch their breath. Wang Shengxiao's chin grew a short beard, and he looked more and more mature. The smile that once made people feel comfortable was less and less. His temperament gradually changed, becoming a little gloomy and more powerful. The orders from Mount Dibbing had become less and less. Most of the time, Wang Shengxiao sat on the stage of formidable person. He ate, practiced, and meditated. The stage of formidable person seemed to have become his private residence. For half a year, he confined himself in the small space of the stage of formidable person. He spent every day with the stone of formidable person, and almost never left the stage of formidable person. This meant that he had never left Mount Dibbing. As a result, he missed out on many important things. The phone vibrated slightly, and the screen lit up. After drinking the last sip of wine, Wang Shengxiao felt refreshed. He took the phone and connected the video call. In the video, there was a room filled with warm light. In the warm yellow light, Song Ci, who was wearing plain pajamas, had long hair. Her slightly plump face was filled with gentleness. "Have you eaten?" Looking at the dark stage of formidable person on the screen, Song Ci asked softly. "Not yet. Jing Xian is in Mount Dibbing. I've made an appointment with him to eat together." Wang Shengxiao laughed. The slight wrinkles between his eyebrows subconsciously relaxed, and his whole body relaxed. "It's so late. Why haven't you gone to bed?" "Your son woke up. It took me a long time to coax him to sleep, but I'm not sleepy anymore." Song Ci held the phone and moved the camera. A newborn baby appeared on the screen. He had a small body and a small face. His mouth was covered and he was sleeping soundly. Wang Shengxiao's eyes were calm, but there was a touch of doting and guilt deep in his eyes. This was his and Song Ci's child. A few months ago, when the child was born, he didn't leave Mount Dibbing, so he didn't see the birth with his own eyes. Since the child was born, he hadn't even seen his father in the video. Wang Shengxiao's mouth moved, and he didn't know what to say for a while. The camera turned. Song Ci glanced at Wang Shengxiao and said with a faint smile, "What? Are you afraid that Haotian will blame you for being a bad father?" Their child was named Wang Haotian, and his nickname was Tutu. It was the name that Wang Shengxiao and Song Ci decided before the child was born. Wang Shengxiao sighed softly, feeling a little lost. "Don't worry. When he's older, I'll tell him that he has the best father who loves him the most," Song Ci said softly. "It won't take that long." Wang Shengxiao smiled and said softly, "When the situation stabilizes, I'll take you home." "Okay." Song Ci nodded. She stared at Wang Shengxiao's face quietly and became silent. "What's wrong?" Wang Shengxiao touched his face. "Nothing." Song Ci shook her head and said softly, "I just miss you." Wang Shengxiao stopped talking and looked at the screen quietly. There were thousands of words to say, but it seemed that everything was in silence. In the slight sound of footsteps, Wang Jingxin came over with a food box. Seeing this scene, he paused and said with a smile, "I'll come back later." "No need." Wang Shengxiao smiled and hung up the video. He glanced at Wang Jingxin and asked, "How's your wife and child?" "Very good. She asked me to thank you. She's very comfortable living here during this time. Wang Jingxin smiled. Her child was already in primary school. His wife was originally a middle-level cadre of the Lin and Trade Union, which was purely an idle job. Half a year ago, the situation in Jiangxia suddenly changed. After Wang Jingxin was transferred to Jianghuai as the governor, he placed his wife and child in Mount Dibing. In terms of the political climate in Jianghuai, Mount Dibing was undoubtedly the best. We're a family. Don't be so polite. Wang Shengxiao shook his head, thought for a while and said softly, "How's the situation in Jianghuai?" "Very good." Wang Jingxin opened the food box, took out some side dishes, and took out a pot of wine. "Don't worry, there won't be any problems." Wang Shengxiao nodded, picked up the wine glass and took a sip. He had no doubt about Wang Jingxin's ability. In fact, Wang Jingxin's situation when he first arrived in Jianghuai was not good. In half a year, he had completely established his foothold, and his performance had also been unanimously recognized by some big shots of the Southeast Group. In the case that Wang Qinglei was already out of control, facing his wild ambition, the Southeast Group could only put more hope on Wang Jingxin, and his performance made everyone very satisfied. "How's Haotian? The little guys are very cute. When are you going to let them come back?" Wang Jingxin asked with a smile. "Now is not the time. We'll see the specific situation in a year." Wang Shengxiao frowned. "Chairman 1. Wang Jingxin hesitated for a brief moment. He wanted to speak but stopped himself. In fact, the reason why he came back this time was mainly to ask about Wen Siyuan's advancement and retreat a year later. This was undoubtedly the most crucial adjustment. Wen Siyuan could take a step forward, stay at the same spot, or retreat. Furthermore, there were 3 outcomes, and any one of them could turn into a good or bad news. Wang Jingxin wanted a clear outcome, and this also concerned whether his methods in Jianghuai were firm or gentle. It's hard to say. Wang Shengxiao shook his head. Whether Li Huaqing stayed or not, and Wen Siyuan's advancement and retreat could be said to be the most concerned issues in the next session. Many things had already begun to operate, and Wang Shengxiao could grasp the process and steps in detail. But for now, the result was still not clear enough, and could even be said to be confusing. "Let's see if we can stop Wang Qinglei," Wang Shengxiao said softly. "If we can stop him, everything will be fine. If we can't, the specific results may only be known at the end." "Jianghuai is not a big problem," Wang Jingxin said calmly. Jianghuai was a province deeply affected by Wuyue. Wang Jingxin could control the situation in Jianghuai and could play a great role, but he could not play a decisive role. "Just do your best," Wang Qinglei said softly. He calculated the time and suddenly smiled. "Don't worry, it's okay. At least there shouldn't be the worst result." Wang Jingxin silently took a sip of wine and did not speak. The so-called worst result was naturally the change of the chairman of Beihai province. If that day really came, it meant that the entire Southeast Group and the Wang family of Beihai would face a critical moment of life and death. Wang Shengxiao said that such a result would not happen. Where did his confidence come from? Wang Shengxiao did not explain anything. He just held the wine glass and quietly looked at the calm Beihai in front of him. His eyes fell on a certain point on the sea level, and he was silent for a long time. Chapter 769. Wang Jingxin was not relieved. In the dim light of the sea, he looked at the calm Wang Shengxiao and felt more and more uneasy. "Do we still have trump cards?" he asked softly. After a pause he continued, "I'm not talking about those troops." "Yes." Wang Shengxiao laughed softly. "Where are they?" Wang Jingxin stared at his profile and said in a low voice. Wang Shengxiao was silent for a while and said slowly, "Tiannan." Wang Jingxin took a deep breath and muttered to himself, "Tiannan." The current situation in Tiannan was very calm. At least on the surface it was calm. The Freedom Corps guarded Ningbian, strictly trained, and served as the new gateway to the southern border of Zhongzhou state. After the chaos in Eastern Europe, the large amount of benefits Li Tianlan had gained in the 5 Eastern European countries had now turned into money. More than 30 wealthy families in Eastern Europe now had close cooperation with Li Tianlan, based in the 5 Eastern European countries. Even some of the wealthy families in Snow Country had boarded Li Tianlan's ship. Various fields in the 5 Eastern European countries had been monopolized by these wealthy families, and part of the business of Zhongzhou state had also started cooperation with these wealthy families. There was no doubt that whether they wanted to get involved in the 5 Eastern European countries or cooperate with Zhongzhou state, they needed Li Tianlan's approval. Because of this, Li Tianlan had obtained a large number of industrial shares of dozens of wealthy families. After a year, these shares had turned into almost astronomical dividends, and a large number of dividends were invested in the construction of Xianyuan City. In addition, a large number of funds and venture capital inside Zhongzhou state had poured into Xianyuan City. This small city, which used to be called Tunan, was shabby and desolate. It was even worse than some of the more developed towns in Zhongzhou state. With this city as the foundation, Xianyuan City was building a brand new city from beginning to end. The huge amount of work, the long urban planning, and the various industrial resources in the city were enough to make people jealous. The first investment of Huading Flourishing Age Fund had reached more than 30 billion. And this was only the first phase of investment. All the big families of the giant group were also contributing their strength. The graduates of the 2 academies recruited by Emperor Dong's palace also began to play their roles. Their combat effectiveness was improving. Among these people, some of the families they belonged to also began to migrate to Tiannan. Some refugees from several small countries near Tiannan, and even some veterans from the Golden Triangle also began to settle down in Xianyuan City. Sufficient funds and a gradually increasing population would eventually become a huge productivity. Ning Qianqing also began to become more and more mature. In just 1 year, the size of Xianyuan City had doubled. All of this meant that Xianyuan City had completely entered the normal stage. Moreover, everyone knew very well that this wasn't the fastest speed in Xianyuan City. While many people were paying attention to the desert, when Li Tianlan officially got out of prison and returned to Tiannan, all kinds of investments would probably usher in a new round of explosive growth. Once such a result appeared, at least the Flourishing Age Fund, which had never been short of money and could even treat money as waste paper, would definitely invest an amount beyond everyone's imagination in Xianyuan City. The rapid development of Xianyuan City was also the reason why the Tiannan city was calm on the surface. Calm on the surface, but it also meant that undercurrents were surging in the dark. To the south of Xianyuan City, there was already a new heaven capital. Li Guangtu hadn't recovered from his injury, and he didn't make a clear statement either. At present, he was already in a state where he was neither close to Zhongzhou State nor East Island. East Island's patience was gradually running out, while the purgatory of Heaven Capital began to slowly move to Tiannan, and the new Heaven Capital was gradually becoming stable. At the lower right of Heaven Capital was Freedom City, where all the superpowers gathered. At present, because there was no absolute ruler, this was also the most chaotic place in Tiannan. That was because this was the most chaotic place in the Tiannan region. However, even though it was the most chaotic place, the major forces still maintained a certain degree of restraint. Compared to normal times, the situation could still be considered to be stable. Further south, near the border of Annan, Burning City and Raging Fire City were also under construction. The Burning Legion constantly sent soldiers here, and they almost moved their family from Africa to here. They also received strong support from Annan. But compared with Xianyuan City, which was in full swing, the construction of the 2 cities occupied by the Burning Legion was obviously not satisfactory. There were 6 cities in Tiannan. While other cities were striving for stability and development, Xianyuan City was already on the road of rapid development. It had money, people, and power. In the barren land of Tiannan, Xianyuan City was like a pearl. Everyone could see its existence and understand its future. Xianyuan City had limits. But Emperor Dong's palace wouldn't have limits. When Xianyuan City was established to a certain extent with the support of massive funds, the next step of Emperor Dong's palace would inevitably be expansion. The so-called expansion, whether for Heaven Capital, Freedom City, or the Burning Legion, was tantamount to invasion. Wang Xingxiao's trump card was in Tiannan. Did he want to help Emperor Dong's palace unify Tiannan, so that he could get the full support of the giant group? While he was thinking about it, he also asked the question, "Do you think it's feasible?" Wang Shengxiao looked back at him. Wang Jingxin narrowed his eyes, thought for a long time, and then said in a low voice, "This is raising a tiger. Whether it's raised or not, a tiger is a tiger." Wang Shengxiao said blandly, "And if Emperor Dong's palace is a tiger, it's not our turn to raise it now. What we need is cooperation." When a complicated situation became simple, the solution to the problem would also become clear. In the past 6 months, the Giant Group and the Southeast Group had a pleasant cooperation and carried out internal reshuffling. But both sides were very clear that their cooperation would end a year later. At that time, the Giant Group would no longer need the Southeast Group, and they were doomed to go their separate ways. But in the foreseeable future, the Southeast Group still needed the support of the Giant Group. After all, in a turbulent situation, neutrality often meant cowardice, especially in the face of huge interests. Once the Giant Group parted ways with the Southeast Group, it was very likely that they would attack the Southeast Group in the next second. The Southeast Group must unite the Giant Group by its side. The intention of the internal reshuffling of the Giant Group was very clear, and Dongqing Wudi was also very determined. In this case, it was only a matter of time before Li Tianlan left the desert. If he hadn't cooperated with the Southeast Group, Li Tianlan might have come out now. It was said that a month ago, Hua Zhengyang, the director of Zhongzhou State, personally visited Li Tianlan in the desert prison and intended to ask him to come out, but Li Tianlan refused. It was not that he couldn't come out, but that he didn't want to come out for the time being. Li Tianlan's freedom couldn't be used as a bargaining chip, so if they wanted to win over the Giant Group, they could only consider Li Tianlan's future. Unify Tiannan. This was a condition that neither Li Tianlan nor the Giant Group could refuse. Although Li Tianlan could also do this without the intervention of the Wang family of Beihai, it would take a longer time. Li Tianlan was only in his 20s this year. Taking over Tiannan in 3 years and taking over Tiannan in 5 years didn't seem to make much difference. But there was still a difference, especially for the future layout of the Giant Group. "I should talk to him," Wang Jingxin said. "Of course, I plan to go to the desert prison in the near future." Wang Shengxiao nodded and smiled. "If you have time, Shun, if I have time, I'll go to see my son." Wang Jingxin took a sip of wine and suddenly said, "What if the target is not Speaker One?" Temporarily. Wang Shengxiao's eyes were gentle. "Even if it's not, it's only temporarily. They will definitely keep a close eye on this position and won't let it go. So this time, even if it's not Speaker One, I will still talk to Li Tianlan. This is not the only way, but at present, it seems to be the most effective way." Wang Jingxin nodded silently. It was not easy for the Wang family of Beihai to stabilize the situation now. At their lowest point, what they had to do was to recuperate and keep their bottom line. In this regard, Li Tianlan was their natural ally. This was the same as when he killed Qi Mulan. The Wang family of Beihai took the initiative to help him. The significance of Tiannan to Li Tianlan was exactly the same as the significance of Beihai province to the Wang family of Beihai. Zhongzhou State could move the speaker of Beihai and threaten the foundation of the Wang family of Beihai. In the future, it could move the speaker of Tiannan and threaten the foundation of Emperor Dong's palace, and vice versa. But there was a premise. That was the significance of Tiannan to Li Tianlan. It was not the significance of Xianyuan City to Li Tianlan. At least, it should not be just Xianyuan City. Everyone understood this truth. Therefore, Wang Shengxiao was still relatively optimistic about the upcoming negotiations. Wang Jingxin drank the wine in the flagon in silence. Suddenly he laughed and changed the topic. "Go to my house when you leave. Your sister-in-law made a few pairs of baby shoes for Haotian. They are very comfortable. Just take them as gifts for the child." "Thank you." Wang Shengxiao laughed. Thinking of his newborn child, his eyes were a little dazed. He had not really seen his child. But the little baby in the video seemed so fragile to him. Wang Shengxiao was very clear that if the Wang family of Beihai could survive the current difficulties, then in the near future, 20 or 30 years later, the very fragile baby would also carry more and more things. Just like his whole life. After standing in this position for hundreds of years, Every clan leader seemed to be shouldering far more than what they had obtained. Wang Shengxiao glanced at Wang Jingxin. His eyes were a little tired. At this moment, he thought of many people. Many people. The ancestors of the Wang family of Beihai, the names on the stage of formidable person, Wang Jingxin in front of him, the 7 major sword-holding families. He thought of himself, Wang Tianzong, Wang Xiaoyao, and Wang Qinglei. Hundreds of years were like a chessboard. Different people in different eras played different chess pieces on this chessboard. Before walking on the stage of formidable person, Wang Shengxiao felt that it was glory. But sitting on the stage of formidable person for half a year, he began to think again and again whether it was worth it for so many people to sacrifice without complaint or to betray at all costs. He suddenly thought of the night before he left Eastern Europe half a year ago. That night, in Fanio City, he was drinking with his second uncle. Looking at Wang Xiaoyao, who was getting more and more gloomy, he calmly told him that his father's injury was very serious, even at the juncture of life and death. That night, Wang Xiaoyao just drank quietly. It was not until he got on the plane that he said something faintly, an extremely indifferent sentence. Life is like this. Death is death. Death was death. Wang Shengxiao smiled. No one knew what he was thinking at this moment. Death was death. Was it worth it? Chapter 770. There was no sound, no time, no direction, no light, no dream. His consciousness was clearer than ever. He kept falling in the darkness. There seemed to be no end to the falling. There was only darkness and silence around him. And pain. He didn't know when the pain started. At the moment he felt the pain that seemed to tear his whole body, had spread all over his body. It was not as if. It was a real pain. That tearing feeling was extremely clear, like the most precise instrument in the world. The instrument enveloped his body, tearing at every corner of his body, inside and out. The cycle repeated endlessly, and it was extremely sharp and fierce. His brain, limbs, and torso. The pain was everywhere. Every inch of his flesh and blood was torn apart. It was as if thousands of swords were pulling on his body. His skin was torn to shreds, and the swords pierced deep into his flesh, tearing apart his blood vessels. Blood seemed to flow out, and every inch of his muscles was torn apart by the swords. The fine sword intent was not surging. It was not like a big river, but like rain. It fell from the sky. Endless rain. The rain-like sword intent kept cutting every bone in his body. The sharp sword energy seemed to penetrate into every cell in his body and finally into his soul. This was a torture more terrible than death by dismemberment. Every minute and every second, his body seemed to be torn apart alive. The absolutely strong willpower made it impossible for him to lose consciousness. The pain that went deep into his soul made him scream and twitch wildly in the darkness, but he couldn't make any sound at all. This darkness seemed to be infinitely vast. It was absolutely silent. There was only darkness. The sound of blood flowing seemed to be an illusion, but it also seemed to be really echoing. The intense pain that made people crazy tormented his heart and mind tenaciously with his heartbeat. The pain had reached the limit. Everything had become numb. The darkness became chaotic. Amidst the long silence, the tearing pain started again. The body that seemed to be cut into powder seemed to be reorganized again. And then it was the most cruel torture. There was no sound, no time, no direction, no coma, no light, no dream. He was falling forever. It was like an eternal sinking. Again and again. He couldn't remember how many times he had been tortured, and he didn't even know how long it had been. 3 days. 3 months. 3 years. Even 3 centuries. Long, desolate, and silent. Countless tortures always came again when his numb body forgot the pain. It was sword intent. The vast and boundless sword intent was close to eternal sword intent. It was like the endless 6 paths of reincarnation, and also like the sharp and fierce 24 moves of sword. Countless sword wills were like tiny runes, like Mount Shu, like the Jade Pool, like the way of swords from all over the world. Yes, the way of the sword. There was no difference in swordsmanship. This was neither the 6 paths of reincarnation, nor the 24 moves of sword. This was the pure path of the sword. It was the simplest, but it encompassed everything. That was why it was perfect. The seemingly fine and weak sword intent was wreaking havoc in every part of his body. His powerful life force continued to heal. And then he was torn again and again, and then healed again. The sword chi was endless. But his life force was getting weaker and weaker. Under the almost uninterrupted pain, he constantly struggled on the verge of death. After an incomparably long time, he seemed to have forgotten who he was and where he was. Only his survival instinct was still supporting him. Live on, live on. The first wisp of life force poured into this dark space like a sweet spring. Like running water. There was more and more running water, more and more rapid, and finally it became a vast ocean. The sword chi did not weaken at all, and it was still constantly circulating. But the healing process of his torn body was constantly speeding up. And the speed of the sword chi tearing his body was a little slower. His body was still falling in the darkness, but he had begun to try his best to control his body. He really tried his best. The pain became even more distinct and unrelenting. His flesh and blood seemed to be gradually merging with the majestic vitality. The speed of the sword chi tearing his body was a little slower again. He didn't know his current state, and he didn't even know what his current fall meant. He just wanted to leave this crazy darkness and regain control of his own body. Move. Even if he just moved a finger. Try. He kept trying. In the dark space of eternal fall, a storm of sword intent appeared one after another. The almost world-destroying sword chi did not stir up any waves in the dark space. There was only silence here. Thousands of times, tens of thousands of times, hundreds of thousands of times. The truly indestructible will supported him to keep trying. And it eventually became instinct. The sword chi was still endless, raging constantly. When the excruciating pain exceeded a certain limit, he finally felt his broken body. That feeling was not the feeling in the darkness, but a very clear perception. The fall stopped. He stood in the darkness, feeling the crazy sword chi raging in his body. His whole body trembled, but he could not make a sound. So he stood where he was, feeling the pain, and took a deep breath. Bang! There seemed to be a slight sound in the dark space. The sound was very light, as if it came from a distant place. But in this almost eternal silence, this voice was like a clap of thunder. This was the first sound he heard. Bang! Another sound came. In the darkness, a softness surged over and completely wrapped his body, like a viscous sea. He vaguely remembered a picture. In the cold sea, the great pressure pressed on him like the world. Behind him was the submarine. His body fell on the surface of the deep sea, walking forward step by step. Then what? He tried hard to think. It seemed like it happened a long time ago, but it also seemed like it happened not long ago. Then in the deep sea, he struck with his sword. In the dark and viscous water, he stretched out his palm subconsciously. Where is the sword? The water rippled slowly. In an instant, light appeared in the boundless darkness. A cold and majestic sword gleam. Sword. Countless swords filled the entire darkness with a single thought from him. The pain became clearer, but his mind became extremely calm. He had no choice. In the darkness, the sky was filled with sword shadows. He picked up a sword casually. The blade trembled slightly. When do you plan to go to the desert? On the stage of Formidable Person, Wang Jingxin tidied up the food box and asked, "Don't you want to go with me?" Although he was a high official, he was not good at drinking. He drank a lot tonight, so he was obviously a little drunk. His body looked shaky, but his mind was very clear. "I'll wait here." Wang Shengxiao shook his head. "Now we don't know the specific plan of the other party. If we go to see Li Tianlan rashly, we won't get any results. This is a game, but first we have to see the means of the academics and the Prince Group, estimate the price we and the Giant Group have to pay, and plan an expected result. If everything is within the acceptable range, then the deal can be made. Now how? I can tell Li Tianlan what I can give him, but I can't tell him what he and the Giant Group will lose. Such a cooperation will not work out." Wang Jingxin was silent for a while, then nodded and said, "That's right." Wang Shengxiao chuckled and said, "Well, it's late. Take a rest. If I disturb you, sister-in-law may scold me." Wang Jingxin laughed and waved his hand. "Let's go." Wang Shengxiao nodded and suddenly said, "Before going to Jianghuai, go to Yuzhou and see Minister Yi." Yi Dongsheng? Wang Jingxin was slightly stunned. It was almost certain that Yi Dongxing would become a director next year. If there was no big accident, this result could not be changed. The so-called big accident was that the Wang family of Beihai would be completely destroyed at that time. Compared with the advance and retreat of Wang Qinglei and Wen Siyuan, deciding Yi Dongxing's position in advance was a means of the Southeast Group to stabilize the situation. Yi Dongxing could be said to be the next flag figure and spiritual leader of the Southeast Group. If she went to see Yi Dongxing at this time, did he have any arrangement? Wang Jingxin looked at Wang Shengxiao with some inquiry in her eyes. Wang Shengxiao answered with a cold voice, "The matter of Jianghuai can't be delayed. Get ready." Wang Jingxin's heart trembled. She nodded and said, "I understand." Wang Shengxiao smiled and raised his hand. It seemed that he wanted to shake hands with Wang Jingxin. However, he suddenly stopped moving. A gust of wind blew over the stage of Formidable Person. It was the highest place in Mount Dibbing, and there would be sea breeze all the time. But Wang Shengxiao instinctively felt that something was wrong. Because of the wind direction, the east wind passed through. But just at that moment, there seemed to be a reverse flow over the entire Beihai. The west wind wrinkled and was extremely cold. Wang Shengxiao suddenly looked up. The sky was full of stars, the bright moon, and the deep night. But everything in his sight became blurred. The whole space seemed to be distorted, and the world was in a trance. Wang Jingxin even thought that he had drunk too much. He shook his head hard. Wang Shengxiao tightly pursed his lips and did not speak. He silently raised his head and looked at the distorted heaven and earth. The west wind stopped. There was a sudden dead silence between the heaven and earth. The sword energy, which was so majestic that it could almost fill the heaven and earth, appeared silently over Beihai. It was densely packed. There seemed to be tens of millions of sword energy in the silent night sky in an instant. The sword energy floated quietly. More and more, it filled the space between heaven and earth. No one knew the source of the sword energy. The unimaginable sword energy instantly covered Beihai and the entire Mount Dibbing. There was a dead silence in the sea area of tens of thousands of meters. Bang! Without any warning, the sword energy that covered the space of tens of thousands of meters suddenly vibrated. It was clear and stable. Supreme and supreme. The vibrating sound instantly spread from the deep sea to the entire Mount Dibbing. It was like the heartbeat of the sky. Chapter 771. Yuzhou Hidden Dragon Sea. The warm sunshine sprinkled in the spacious office. Behind the desk, Li Huaqing silently looked at the document in his hand, narrowed his eyes, and took a sip of tea. The content of the document was very formal, with the seal of the Wuyue Parliament. It could be said to be a recommendation letter, and it was a recommendation letter that did not go through the normal procedures. Wang Qinglei, the speaker of Wuyue, recommended the deputy governor of Wuyue to be the deputy speaker of a province in western Zhongzhou state. The provincial parliament was generally not qualified to do so, but Wang Qinglei was different. He was a member of Zhongzhou state. Therefore, although this recommendation letter had the signatures of most of the directors of Wuyue, it could actually be said that Wang Qinglei proposed a personnel transfer as a member of parliament. This document did not pass through the Ministry of Personnel and appeared directly on Li Huaqing's desk. In just a few hours, Prime Minister Chen Fangqing had received the news. The two sat face to face, thinking about the contents of the document, and no one spoke for a while. "What do you think?" Li Huaqing suddenly asked. "We can give it to him." Chen Fangqing didn't hesitate at all. On the way here, he had already thought of everything he needed to think about. Some of the possible consequences were also within his range of tolerance. He's under a lot of pressure now. It's equivalent to asking us for help. Plus, 1 year's time shouldn't be a problem. Wang Tonglu. Li Huaqing looked at the document and whispered to himself. Wang Tonglu was the deputy speaker of Wuyue that Wang Qinglei intended to transfer this time. He was one of the directors of Wuyue. He had served in Wuyue for a long time, deeply rooted, and highly respected. With his qualifications, if he wanted to be transferred, It was almost no problem for him to become the governor of a province. He was the backbone of the Southeast Group. If Wu Yue had not suffered a major change, he would have been the best candidate to be the governor of Wu Yue after Wang Qinglei left Wu Yue. In the past year, the internal situation of Zhongzhou State had changed, especially in the past 6 months. In the turbulent times, Wang Tonglu, who had been favored by others, had become gloomy. The reason was actually not complicated at all. Now Wang Tonglu could be said to be the only capable general of the Southeast Group among the 13 directors of Wu Yue. Wang Qinglei could also be said to be a member of the Southeast Group, but everyone knew that he had almost completely fallen out with the Southeast Group. Wang Tonglu was a capable general who was truly loyal to the Southeast Group and Mount Dibing. There were many such capable generals in Wu Yue before. However, as Wang Qinglei's actions in Wu Yue became more and more intense, such people gradually became fewer and fewer. After Yu Chuanguang, the former mayor of Huating, became the governor of Wu Yue, Wang Qinglei was even more free. As a close friend of Wang Xiaoyao, Yu Chuanguang's arrival could be said to be a blessing for Wang Xiao. It was Yao's official statement. He and Wang Qinglei cooperated very well. In a very short time, they had completely cleared out the forces loyal to Mount Dibing. If Wang Tonglu left, for the Southeast Group, Wu Yue, the most developed province in Zhongzhou State that they had held for hundreds of years, and had always been their backyard, would be completely lost. This was the core foundation of the Southeast Group. Li Huaqing hesitated. He was not distressed for the Southeast Group. In fact, this was their goal, and at this point, there was nothing to be distressed about. The Southeast Group had long lost control of Wu Yue, but Wang Tonglu was there, at least he could be regarded as a fig leaf. Beihai and Wu Yue were the two most core places of the Southeast Group. Now, when they were preparing to target Beihai, they wanted to tear off the fig leaf of Wu Yue. Li Huaqing felt that they had gone too far. He was the president, so he must take the overall situation into consideration. If this step was so intense, it would undoubtedly cause a backlash from the Southeast Group, and the loss would undoubtedly outweigh the gain. Chen Fangqing knew his concerns. He hesitated and said slowly, "We still have to promise him. But the direction of Wang Tonglu's office is not very good. Let him be the governor. It is not appropriate to force him out and give him the position of deputy speaker." Li Huaqing nodded slowly. "I will communicate with Comrade Yi Dongsheng on this matter later." Chen Fangqing nodded noncommittally. While supporting Wang Qinglei, he also had to take care of the face of the Southeast Group. The current situation was too sensitive. They had to maintain the situation while attacking. As long as Wang Tonglu could leave, it meant that Wang Qinglei had completely taken over Wu Yue. Moreover, they did not have to worry about Wang Qinglei covering the sky in Wu Yue for the time being. After all, he only had less than a year. After a year, he would come to Yuzhou. At that time, Yu Chuanguang would take advantage of the situation and become the new member and Wu Yue's speaker. In this way, Wang Qinglei's faction would have a member and a director. This kind of strength was already a new group that was not weaker than the North Group. Therefore, this step of Wang Tonglu's was very crucial. As long as Yi Dongxing agreed, it was okay to give him some benefits to balance the situation. Now the biggest target of the academics was Wu Yue and Beihai. Next year, the governor of Wu Yue was bound to be vacant. Whether the academics would get this position, or give it to the Prince Group would depend on their harvest in Beihai a year later. "We can give it to him." Li Huaqing finally nodded. But he also needs to speed up his actions. Chen Fangqing nodded, held the cup and said, "I'll talk to him." Beihai's conscription is getting more and more outrageous. Li Huaqing took a deep breath, and his tone was a little solemn. Now the scale of the Beihai Corps had doubled, and hundreds of thousands of troops were training all day long. The army could be said to cover the sky and the sun, and the scale of the maneuver was getting larger and larger. These were undoubtedly warnings from Beihai to Zhongzhou State. Wang Shengxiao's strength that time was not meaningless. At least now, when the academics and the Prince Group targeted the Southeast Group again, they had begun to consider how to maintain the situation and take care of their thoughts. In the end, it was still the same sentence. Zhongzhou State versus Beihai. This was not a question of whether they could defeat them, or whether they dared to fight. It was a question of whether it was necessary to fight. The answer was very simple. There was no need. There was no need at all. What they wanted was to control Beihai. That was all. But for Wang Xingxiao, he had his bottom line. There was no need to talk about the necessity of guarding Beihai. This was also not a question of whether they could defeat them or not, but whether they dared to fight. Wang Xingxiao dared to fight. He really dared to fight. The Wang family of Beihai had always kept a small number of nuclear weapons. The number of nuclear weapons was very small. If they were launched at Zhongzhou State was 100% sure that it could intercept all the nuclear weapons of Beihai outside Zhongzhou State, because they really did not have many nuclear weapons. But what if Wang Xingxiao wanted to use them in Beihai? No matter how few nuclear weapons they had, as long as they exploded in Beihai province, it was enough to completely sink 160,000 square kilometers of land in Beihai province to the bottom of the sea. The radiation and aftermath of the explosion could even affect Liaodong, which was closest to Beihai. If they really forced Wang Xingxiao to this point, Beihai province would be completely submerged by the sea and disappear from the map. Liaodong would suffer heavy losses. And what did Zhongzhou State get? Nothing was gained. This was not their original intention at all. Their original intention was not to destroy Beihai, but to control Beihai province. In this way, when Wang Xingxiao said that he really dared to fight, Zhongzhou State had to adjust its strategy. When their power expanded to the extent of the Wang family of Beihai, foreign enemies could bring them setbacks, but it was almost impossible to completely destroy them. The only way was to break their rule from the inside. Wang Qinglei. He was the most suitable candidate. As long as Wang Qinglei became the new patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai, then everything could be discussed. Li Huaqing and Chen Fangqing were willing to support Wang Qinglei. But Wang Qinglei also had to do something to put great pressure on the Wang family of Beihai in other aspects. What's his plan? Li Huaqing glanced at Chen Fangqing and asked slowly. Chen Fangqing took a sip of tea and said slowly, I talked to him once before. He told me that in Europe, there is another His Majesty. Chapter 772. The soft light fell on some thin documents. Melad looked at His Majesty in front of him with a serious expression, and silently waited for his orders. This was the underground laboratory in Italos. Every once in a while His Majesty would appear here. Most of the time, this could be regarded as the place where he and Melad had agreed to meet. The air was heavy and silent. Melad, who had been waiting for a long time, finally couldn't help but say, Your Majesty, are you going to make a move? What, are you scared? His Majesty chuckled, picked up a peanut on the table, and put it into his mouth. In half a year's time, His Majesty's realm seemed to have become more and more unfathomable. The light that enveloped his body was vast and deep, like starlight, but also like clouds and mist. Even though Melad was an expert who was close to the peak of the invincible realm, he couldn't see through his true appearance when facing him at this time. To be honest, a little. Melad laughed. He was a little simple and honest. But if your Majesty has an order, I will do it. His Majesty grunted and held the document without saying anything for a while. This was an internal document from the Parliament of Zhongzhou State. Of course, it was a copy, not the original. The original copy had appeared on the desk of the Minister of the Ministry of Personnel of Zhongzhou State a day ago, and the Ministry of Personnel had sent the document to Wuyue Province as soon as possible, appointing Deputy Governor Wang Tonglu, the director of Wuyue Province, as the governor of a province in Zhongzhou State. The document had come into effect. A few hours ago, Wuyue had already held a farewell party. Wang Tonglu, the backbone of the Southeast Group, had already left Wuyue dejectedly. This also meant that Wang Qinglei and Yu Chuanguang had completely cut off Wuyue from the Southeast Group's hands and firmly controlled it. It had become the core base and base of their new group. Melad had already read the document. He also knew what this meant. Wuyue was a gift from the Central State Parliament to Wang Qinglei. Vaguely, he was also expressing his support for Wang Qinglei's decision to establish his own sect. After giving such a big gift, Wang Qinglei had to return the favor. Don't worry, His Majesty said slowly. Wait a little longer. But preparations must be made. Mellad said softly. Besides, the preparation is almost complete. 6 Knights Commanders, 12 Grand Knights, and 200 Knights Templar can set off at any time. Their cooperation with the Church had been completely finalized, and they were the closest long-term allies. The Pope had already fully expressed his trust and welcome to His Majesty. All of this was because of a story that His Majesty had told the Pope half a year ago, or the story the Pope had seen. Therefore, both sides temporarily put down most of their vigilance. After the coronation, His Majesty and Mellad began to reorganize the temple as quickly as possible. This was the bargaining chip they used to trade with the Vatican in Eastern Europe. After chaos, the head knight of the Knights Templar, had died in the hands of Wang Tianzong in Eastern Europe. The Knights Templar had been in a leaderless state. However, as the spokesperson of the Vatican in the Dark World, the foundation of the Knights Templar was extremely strong. It could be said that it had the structure of a true superpower. Mellad had lost some things in the process of taking over, but he had taken over nearly 70% of the entire Knights Templar. Today, the Knights Templar could almost be said to have broken away from the Vatican and become a close ally of the Vatican. It could be said that it had become a close ally of the Vatican. Mellad's strength was higher than that of chaos. With His Majesty, although the size of the Knights Templar was a little small, it was no worse than in its heyday. When the undercurrent of the Dark World was surging, no one noticed that an undercurrent lurking around Italos had completely taken shape. It had become a brand new superpower, lurking in the Dark World. Although half a year was not a long time, Mellad had been the vice commander of the Holy Disarmament Corps before. It was not difficult for him to take over the Knights Templar. During this period of time, it was enough for him to win people's hearts and stabilize the foundation. After the internal situation stabilized, the next step was naturally to expand outwards. The brand new Knights Templar needed a real high-profile appearance to tell the whole Dark World of their existence. Mellad had been looking forward to it. But he didn't expect that this appearance would be aimed at the Wang family of Beihai. The Wang family of Beihai. Mellad didn't panic, but he was really a little nervous. But His Majesty and Wang Qinglei had always had a cooperative relationship. Wang Qinglei wanted to give a big gift to the Zhongzhou State Parliament. His Majesty was the most powerful force he could borrow. Prepare more people. His Majesty said slowly. Wang Qinglei should contact me in the near future. Let the people you have prepared now go to East Island to hide, and find an opportunity to test them first. Mellad was stunned, then nodded and agreed. 6 commanders of knights, 12 Grand Knights, and 200 Knights Templar. The lineup he had prepared was strong enough, especially in the Dark World, where there was an extreme shortage of invincible realm experts. This was a power that could turn the world upside down wherever they went. Knights Templar was the foundation of a superpower. The commander of Knights Templar must be an invincible realm expert. And the weakest of the 12 commanders of knights was an expert at the peak of the Thundershocking realm, or a half-step invincible realm. The Grand Knights were required to be in the Thundershocking realm. The Knights Templar were the elites of Knights Templar. The Fire-Flaming realm was the foundation, and there were also experts in the Thundershocking realm leading the team. If these forces fought with the Wang family of Beihai, they naturally couldn't win. But their task wasn't to fight. What they needed to do was to put enough pressure on Mount Dibing. When the pressure reached a certain level, the support of Zhongzhou State would arrive as scheduled. At that time, they could take advantage of the situation to retreat. At that time, Zhongzhou State would have enough reasons to start intervening in the internal affairs of the Wang family of Beihai. Of course, Zhongzhou State also needed to complete all this through Wang Qinglei, which was equivalent to improving Wang Qinglei's status in Beihai province in a disguised form. Mellad, His Majesty suddenly said. Tell me, what do we need to be worthy of what we are paying now? Mellad narrowed his eyes, and there was some excitement in his eyes. Wang Qinglei needed to borrow power, and Knights Templar needed to bleed. Since it was cooperation, Wang Qinglei definitely needed to give enough compensation. There were too many things they needed in the huge Wang family of Beihai. How about a team? Mellad said with some excitement. The glorious team of Knights Templar was one of the things he lost when he integrated Knights Templar. It belonged to the core power of the Vatican. Since Knights Templar no longer belonged to the Vatican, the Pope naturally had to take this part of the power back. Mellad had always been envious of this. The Wang family of Beihai has more than one team. Mellad chuckled and said, "Their team is equipped with the world's most advanced fighter jets, which can enhance our strength." "It's too petty." His Majesty thought for a moment and said quietly. Mellad froze for a moment and said cautiously, "What do you want, Your Majesty?" His Majesty was silent for a moment and laughed. "I want something he can afford to give, but he absolutely doesn't want to give." Chapter 773. Mellad didn't know what it was that Wang Qinglei could afford to give but absolutely didn't want to give. At the very least, it wouldn't be a team. Every superpower had its own team. To put it bluntly, the team was the air power of a superpower. A standard team had 12 fighter jets, 5 armed helicopters, 2 transport planes, and an air refueling aircraft. According to different situations, when fighting at close range from the base camp, the team would be equipped with missile arrays, luxuriously equipped with stealth reconnaissance aircraft, and so on. These big toys were very precious trump cards in the hands of any superpower. But for the Wang family of Beihai, this was definitely not something that could hurt them. The medium-sized aircraft carrier owned by the Beihai Corps was enough to provide countless possibilities for their tactics in the state of war. Therefore, when the superpowers only had 1 or 2 teams, the Wang family of Beihai had a team group, which was not a number that could be included in 1 or 2 teams at all. If it wasn't a team, then what did His Majesty want? Mellad was silent for a while. Just as he was about to speak, the doorbell suddenly rang. His Majesty waved his hand. Mellad walked over and opened the door of the dormitory. Outside the door, a beautiful woman with an extremely numb expression stood there, holding a tray in her hand. "Dear Dr. Murphy, I hope you can let me hear the good news I want to hear." His Majesty laughed with some pleasure. Murphy's face suddenly turned pale for a moment. He bit his lip tightly and said in a dry voice, "The antidote is still being studied." His Majesty said calmly, "Do you have a direction?" "Yes, but we are still trying. This kind of toxin is very terrible. We can barely suppress its toxin now, but we can't find a solution for the time being." Murphy's voice was a little bitter and anxious. "The last time I came here, you told me the same thing. I'm a little disappointed." His Majesty said blandly. "No, it's different from last time." Dr. Murphy trembled. "This time the medicine is more effective than the last time. Your Majesty, I'm really working hard." All right, Murphy." His Majesty waved his hand. "You're too nervous. I believe you're working hard enough, but your progress is still too slow. I hope you can remember that your daughter also has this kind of toxin in her body. I can still barely hold on, but your lovely daughter doesn't have much time left. Do you understand?" Murphy lowered his voice. He lowered his head, and a look of extreme hatred and fear flashed in his eyes. She took 2 steps forward with the tray and said softly, "I understand." His Majesty stretched out his arm, revealing his veins. On the tray was a syringe and a tube of transparent, colorless medicine. Murphy took the syringe and carefully injected the medicine into His Majesty's body. During the whole process, Mellad stood next to His Majesty. He narrowed his eyes and stared at Murphy's every move. His Majesty closed his eyes. As the drug was injected, his body became more and more stiff. Finally, his body completely solidified on the chair. He did not breathe, and even his heart seemed to have stopped beating. Mellad did not say anything. Murphy waited quietly. After some time, His Majesty's body trembled, and he let out a long sigh. The cloud of starlight that enveloped him began to circulate continuously, and the traces became more and more natural. Even its scale seemed to have expanded a lot. Mellad slowly relaxed and looked at the starry clouds around His Majesty. There was some awe in his eyes. As an expert who was infinitely close to the peak of the invincible realm, he naturally knew what this starlight cloud was. This was a domain. It was not a pseudo-domain. It was a domain that was truly flawless and had even surpassed the peak of the invincible realm. The perfection of the domain also represented His Majesty's true realm. However, unlike the super experts who had really surpassed the peak of the invincible realm, His Majesty's domain could only be maintained in a very small space for some reason. This was undoubtedly His Majesty's biggest weakness. His Majesty slowly stood up, moved his body, and sighed comfortably. Go, Murphy. You have 2 hours to spend with your husband and daughter. His Majesty said softly. Murphy bowed deeply and couldn't wait to turn around and leave the dormitory of the laboratory. The door was closed again. His Majesty slowly moved his body and adapted to the strange power. His movements were very slow, but the space of the entire dormitory was slightly distorted as he moved slowly. Mellad. He suddenly spoke in a soft voice. Your Majesty. Mellad took a step forward. His Majesty laughed. After the next injection, maybe my strength will be close to your current level. Your Majesty is too modest, even now merely. Even now, Mellad is no match for you. Mellad's voice was very respectful, and it came from the bottom of his heart. His Majesty's strength at his peak had completely surpassed the peak of the invincible realm. Although he was not really supreme, seriously speaking, his strength should be a little stronger than that of Lin Fengting and Li Guangtu in Eastern Europe. He could not compare with Wang Tianzong in the end day of Mormons, but compared with Wang Tianzong before Mormons, he should be on par with him. With such strength, once the domain or sword energy was expanded, it would be enough to cover a distance of 10,000 meters in an instant. His Majesty could not do this now. His domain could only reach its peak within a distance of a few meters around him. But this was not because his strength was not enough, but because of his body. Even if Mellad was close to the peak of the invincible realm now, if he fought with His Majesty in close combat within a distance of a few meters, he would definitely not be a match for His Majesty. Of course, he was not a match for His Majesty in close combat. If he wanted to leave, His Majesty's domain was too small, and could not keep him. His Majesty glanced at him, and touched Mellad's head with a smile. Mellad maintained his bent posture, and lowered his head. These shackles, His Majesty sighed and said. I've been carrying them for too long. Dr. Murphy still has some strength. I believe that she can develop an antidote as soon as possible. As long as the poison in your Majesty's body is removed and your Majesty returns to the peak, we will be the #1 force in the dark world. Mellad said respectfully. There's not much time left. His Majesty said softly. Li Tianlan won't give me too much time, and neither will Wang Tianzong. Before Li Tianlan reaches the peak of the invincible realm, and before Wang Tianzong recovers from his injury, I must find a way. There must be a way, Mellad said in a deep voice. Of course. His Majesty smiled and narrowed his eyes. As long as he could recover to his peak state before that, with his strength at his peak, he should be able to try to break into the desert prison. Under the suppression of the intensive firepower of the desert prison, he would kill Li Tianlan at the risk of being seriously injured. Then it would be Wang Tianzong. Once the two of them died, he would no longer have any scruples in this era. His Majesty closed his eyes and took a deep breath. It seemed that every cell in his body was carrying a kind of eager power. The communication video suddenly rang. Mellad turned his head and took a look. He raised his eyebrows slightly and said, Your Majesty, it's Wang Qinglei's communication. Chapter 774. Mellad left the room. The communication from afar had been connected, and Wang Qinglei's figure appeared on the screen. His clothes were neat, and his expression was calm and dignified. His Majesty, who was wrapped in starlight clouds and mist, looked at the screen quietly. They were silent for a long time. Wang Tonglu has been transferred away. After an unknown period of time, Wang Qinglei slowly opened his mouth, his voice indifferent. Congratulations. His Majesty said with a chuckle. The last heavyweight in Wuyue who was qualified to resist Wang Qinglei left Wuyue dejectedly. The most developed province in Zhongzhou State had now completely fallen into Wang Qinglei's hands. It was no exaggeration to say that as long as Wang Qinglei could go further next year, even if he could not reach the top in the end, a new group would have taken shape. With the foundation of Wuyue, it could completely support the continuous development of a new group. This was indeed worthy of congratulation. But the premise was that Wang Qinglei could really improve next year. Wang Qinglei took a deep look at His Majesty and suddenly asked, Who are you? This problem had been plaguing him for too long. The cooperation between the two had been going on for a long time. He almost watched the other party turn from an ordinary person with nothing into a giant who could really stand at the peak of the dark world. The cooperation between the two was very obscure, and every time His Majesty made a move, he had a very clear purpose. It turned out that almost all of his plans were successful, so he had more and more chips in his hands. In his eyes, the dark world seemed to be like a chessboard. He kept putting chess pieces on the chessboard, looking careful but inexplicable. The chaos in Eastern Europe became the most critical step. He did not plot against those invincible realm experts, but after a large number of invincible realm experts died, he successfully got Knights Templar. All the accumulation was completely transformed at that moment, allowing him to reach the peak of the dark world in one fell swoop. Wang Qinglei didn't know if His Majesty had any other bargaining chips, but at this moment in his heart, His Majesty was almost the strongest person in the dark world. Whether it was his personal strength or the power he held in his hands, the other party definitely had more than just temple. In fact, the temple was only a part of their strength that they had purposely revealed. If Wang Qinglei did not know his true identity, he would not have dared to cooperate with him. This was also the main reason why he had hesitated to contact the other party until now. Is it important? His Majesty chuckled. His voice was very gentle, as if he would never be impatient. Very important. Wang Qinglei nodded seriously, and said in a deep voice, "No, I think it's more important if you can improve next year." His Majesty said with a smile. Wang Qinglei fell silent. Relatively speaking, this was indeed the most important matter. The attitude of the academics and the prince group to support him was extremely obvious. Wu Yu had been transferred frequently in the past 6 months, and it was almost clear. When the Southeast group reshuffled internally, the first one they thought of was Wu Yue. They also hoped that Wang Qinglei would be alone in Wu Yue. That was the most dangerous period for Wang Qinglei. He went to Yuzhou to meet Li Huaqing and Chen Fangqing to express his attitude. In the end, the two groups joined hands to withstand the pressure of the Southeast group. At the same time, they also made a lot of concessions. The premise of the Southeast group's smooth shuffle was to give up Wu Yue. Now Wang Qinglei could be said to have his own base camp, and all of this came from the support of the academics and the prince group. In other words, at this time next year, even if he could go further, he would still be the leader of the Southeast group in name, but in fact he could already be said to be a member of the academics and the prince group. And the two groups gave him such great support. Wang Qinglei must give something in return. Although a director was important, compared to the Southeast group, it was not particularly important. Therefore, the academics and the prince group could accept Wang Qinglei swinging between them because their current interests were the same, which was to take over the Southeast group. After they divided up the Southeast group, it was estimated that Wang Qinglei would retire at that time. Naturally, there was no need to worry about these things. Wang Shengxiao had made it clear that he would never compromise. Therefore, after weighing the pros and cons, Zhongzhou State could only strive to break through their position from the inside. Wang Qinglei was the most suitable candidate. Therefore, everyone was very clear that Wang Tonglu's transfer meant that Wang Qinglei completely controlled Wu Yue. And after having his own base, Wang Qinglei must take action against the Wang family of Beihai, put pressure on Beihai from the inside, and even create a real breakthrough for Zhongzhou State. The first person Wang Qinglei thought of was His Majesty. "What do you want?" Wang Qinglei took a deep breath and temporarily stopped thinking about His Majesty's identity. His identity. Since it was cooperation, he must give His Majesty something. After all, the other party was not obliged to help. "Huh." His Majesty smiled and said, "I should say, what do you need me to do now, so that I can make a price right?" "Attack Beihai province." Wang Qinglei said calmly. "Invade from all sides, make Beihai province completely chaotic, spread rumors, reduce the control of Mount Dibbing over the people of Beihai, weaken the combat capability of the Beihai Corps, and get the technology of Mount Dibbing. I only have one requirement: chaos." He paused and said seriously, "The more chaotic, the better." Do you want Wang Shengxiao to take the initiative to ask for help from Zhongzhou State when he can't hold on? His Majesty's tone was playful. Wang Qinglei did not speak. In fact, Wang Shengxiao's attitude was not within his consideration. After all, Beihai was a part of Zhongzhou State. When Beihai province was chaotic to a certain extent, Zhongzhou State could take the initiative to intervene in the affairs of Beihai. It was useless even if Wang Shengxiao disagreed. Last time Zhongzhou State forced the Wang family of Beihai, Wang Shengxiao could react violently. This time Beihai was in internal chaos, and Zhongzhou State took the initiative to help. Would Wang Shengxiao dare to react violently? If he dared to do so, it would be treason. Can you do it? Wang Qinglei asked calmly. His Majesty was silent for about a minute. 4 invincible realm experts, 40 thunder-shocking realm experts, and more than 500 fire-flaming realm experts. His voice slowly sounded across the screen, like a bloody storm. This is a conservative estimate. Do you think it's enough? 4 invincible realm experts. How many invincible realm experts were there in the entire Dark World now? Wang Qinglei's heart suddenly shook, and his face looked a little pale. This kind of lineup. It was not a question of whether it was enough or not, but how much did he have to pay if the other side sent out such a lineup? What do you want? Wang Qinglei asked again. What do you want to give me? His Majesty asked back. Wang Qinglei looked at the screen expressionlessly and said nothing. His Majesty chuckled, looked at the screen and said calmly, I want Beihai. Or Kunlun City. Choose one of the two. Which one will you choose? Or how will the parliament choose? Chapter 775. Wang Qinglei didn't speak for a long time. He stood in front of the screen, and his firm and calm expression was like a rock, but the obvious rise and fall of his breath still revealed his mood. He even thought he had heard wrong. Beihai Kunlun City. Choose one of the two? This was simply the most absurd request he had ever heard. And it was also the most naked ambition he had ever seen. His Majesty sat down on a reclining chair opposite the screen, and slowly leaned against the back of the chair. The chair shook slightly and made a slight sound. His fingers unconsciously tapped the armrest of the chair, and his voice was neither arrogant nor impatient. How should I choose? Are you crazy? Wang Qinglei said incredulously. His Majesty laughed, and the starlight cloud floated slightly around him. His voice sounded a little indifferent. Likewise. You want to reach the top after leaving the southeast group. I want Beihai or Kunlun City. What's the difference? Do you know what you're talking about? Wang Qinglei suppressed his anger, and asked word by word. He was indeed shocked by His Majesty's strength. 4 invincible realm experts and dozens of thunder-shocking realm experts. Not to mention now, even before Eastern Europe, this kind of lineup was not something that any force could come up with. No, strictly speaking, no force could come up with so many experts, including the Wang family of Beihai. Before Eastern Europe, the Wang family of Beihai only had 1 invincible realm expert, Wang Tianzong. Even if Heaven Saber DK was counted, there were only 2 of them. Of course, these 2 people had the strength to kill all 4 invincible realm experts, but this did not mean that invincible realm experts were cabbages. Now that all the experts at the peak of the invincible realm were silent, there were less than 10 people in the entire Dark World with peak combat capability, including several newly promoted invincible realm experts. His Majesty could mobilize 4 of them. This number might include himself, but it was enough to shock people. But Wang Qinglei was more shocked by the other party's appetite. You want Beihai, but it's better to be in our hands than in your hands. What the parliament wants is Beihai. Where do you get the courage to snatch things from the parliament of Zhongzhou State? Wang Qinglei said in disbelief. The game between the parliament of Zhongzhou State and the Wang family of Beihai could be said to be fruitful at present. But strictly speaking, even if they lost Wuyue, the Wang family of Beihai would not really suffer a serious injury. The game between the 2 sides was destined to be a very long process. 10 years, 20 years, or even longer. Everyone involved in it was prepared to fight a protracted war. The most important reason was the Wang family of Beihai, or the Wang family of Beihai in Zhongzhou State. His Majesty actually wanted the North Sea. Not to mention how likely it was, even if he really got Beihai, how could he face Zhongzhou State? The current game was only an internal problem of Zhongzhou State, So it needed to be discussed, compromised, and balanced. If a foreign force like His Majesty occupied Beihai, it would be an invasion. There was no game at all. Zhongzhou state did not need to hesitate at all, and would directly send troops to destroy everything His Majesty had. 4 invincible realm experts were indeed terrible, but in the face of the most powerful hegemon country in the world, even if you had 40 invincible realm experts, what could you do? You want to enter Mount Dibbing? Wang Qinglei's expression was completely cold. He did not know if His Majesty was crazy, but even if he was, he would not agree to this condition. Beihai, Kunlun City. One was the territory that Zhongzhou state wanted to completely control the most, and the other was the special warfare center of Zhongzhou state. He would not choose either, and he could not choose either. Don't get me wrong. His Majesty smiled and said, I'm just talking about Beihai, not Mount Dibbing. It's Beihai in history. Beihai in history. Wang Qinglei's eyes narrowed, and he finally understood the other party's intention. The so-called history of the other party had never been recognized by Beihai province, but this history was not strange at all, because people often mentioned it. And it was not a person who often mentioned this history, but a country. East Island. Beihai in their eyes was completely in the past. It was the North Island that once belonged to them hundreds of years ago. In the territory of Beihai province today, it was the south of Kanglin River. The areas of Kanglin, Tongtian, and Qiushui occupied half of the area of Beihai province. What His Majesty wanted was precisely this half of the North Sea province. Wang Qinglei's expression was cold. He had cooperated with His Majesty several times, and they had always been very happy. But this time, His Majesty's appetite was completely beyond his expectation. He did want to reach the top in Zhongzhou state, and he also wanted to take the position of the patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai. But it did not mean that he could tolerate the other party's bottomless destruction of Beihai. That was his Beihai province. He could cooperate with His Majesty to make him go to Beihai to cause chaos, and he could also work with the academics and the prince group to break up the current Beihai. That was because he knew that after he reached the top, he could reverse the situation and reach an agreement with Zhongzhou state again. Now, if he gave half of Beihai to the other party, he would be the eternal sinner of the Wang family of Beihai. He wanted to be the patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai. How could he be willing to see Beihai divided in his hands? I don't want to. Wang Qinglei's voice was cold. He would rather give up this cooperation than answer. His Majesty's condition. As for the Kunlun city that the other party wanted, that was not something he could decide. I'm afraid it's not up to you. His Majesty said slowly. Don't forget this is Zhongzhou state. Wang Qinglei said coldly. But it's not your Zhongzhou state yet. His Majesty's tone did not fluctuate at all. I can bypass you and talk to Zhongzhou state. What do you think they will choose? Why do you think Zhongzhou state will agree to you? Wang Qinglei sneered and said, This is the territory of Zhongzhou state. I'm also from Zhongzhou state. His Majesty said blandly. If I control Beihai, I will form a closer relationship with Zhongzhou state. I know what I want, what I can rely on, and what I can bring to Zhongzhou state. Why won't Zhongzhou state agree? Everyone is plotting Beihai. After they succeed, they also need someone to manage it. I'm from Zhongzhou state, not some foreign force. My force can naturally be called the force of Zhongzhou state. After I take Beihai and divide the Beihai province, I can withstand the pressure of Mount Dibbing and make the two groups more relaxed. Why won't they agree? His Majesty smiled and continued. The most important thing is that I will be more obedient than the Wang family of Beihai. My Beihai is a part of Zhongzhou state, a part that really belongs to Zhongzhou state. Wang Qinglei's face twisted and became more and more ugly. Zhongzhou state can't trust you at all. Trust takes time, but cooperation only needs benefits. So far, I haven't done anything wrong to Zhongzhou state. As a Zhongzhou state person, as long as there is a basis for cooperation, Zhongzhou state can naturally see my position clearly. His Majesty said calmly. At present, Zhongzhou state seems to lack a dark force that specializes in overseas affairs. Kunlun city is no longer useful. Li Tianlan's future is in Tiannan. As long as the parliament allows me to expand in the name of Zhongzhou state, I can bring unimaginable benefits to Zhongzhou state. Wang Qinglei was completely silent. He knew very well that as long as His Majesty was sincere, Zhongzhou State would not refuse such cooperation, and there was no reason to refuse. In front of the screen he lit a cigarette. After smoking most of it, he said in a hoarse voice, "In that case, what do you still want from me?" His Majesty looked at him for a long time, then said with a smile, "In fact, it was you who asked me." "Wang Qinglei, I will communicate with Zhongzhou State." His Majesty's voice was gentle. "But for the sake of you taking the initiative to find me, I can give you a chance. After I take Beihai, you can exchange Kunlun City with me." Chapter 776. Life in the desert prison was like stagnant water, boring and repetitive. There was nothing new, only new stories. The story came from Zhou Tong. It was about his experience in most of his life. Li Tianlan's life was still the same. He meditated every day, thinking about how to enter the invincible realm. But there was one more thing in his leisure time, which was to chat with Zhou Tong. Li Tianlan regarded it as a class, and Zhou Tong regarded it as a memory of his life. His life in his 70s could be said to be magnificent. Deep in the prison, he could still make his family a core part of the prince group. This old man really had too many stories and too much experience. Li Tianlan was very young, so what he lacked most was experience. Looking at the future, the rise of Emperor Dong's palace was almost unstoppable, so Li Tianlan had to learn how to be a qualified leader. Zhou Tong was the best teacher. He didn't have to teach Li Tianlan specific means, but he used to be in a high enough position to teach Li Tianlan what to do when standing at the top, what kind of mind and vision he should have. Zhou Tong was not the only person that Li Tianlan planned to bring out of the desert prison. There were 9 people on the list that Qin Weibai had sorted out, and Zhou Tong was just one of them. Li Tianlan recently paid attention to the status of the 9 people. 2 of them were dead, and 2 of them had become a little delirious. Li Tianlan observed the last one. After learning about his past through Xiaomahai, he finally decided that he was not trustworthy, or in other words, he did not have the conditions that he could use with confidence. In this way, there were only 4 people on the list in his hand. Zhou Tong was one. The other was a Chinese from Annan State. Before entering the prison, he was the head of a large intelligence organization. The intelligence coverage covered more than half of Southeast Asia and Zhongzhou State. At its peak, it even extended its tentacles to Snow Country. It had been nearly 10 years since he was arrested in Zhongzhou State for selling intelligence of Zhongzhou State. The other 2 were second-to-none financial tycoons in Zhongzhou State before entering the prison, but they eventually became the stepping stones of the Flourishing Age Fund. It could even be said that they were the most important stepping stones since the rise of the Flourishing Age Fund. When they were driven to desperation by Han Donglu, they secretly accepted the capital injection of overseas consortiums and signed a series of agreements full of insider information. One of them was arrested and the other surrendered. It had been nearly 10 years since they were in prison. Li Tianlan didn't need any supermasters in martial arts. Nowadays, there were at least 30 Thundershocking Realm Masters locked up in the desert prison, and the worst one was close to the peak of the Thundershocking Realm. But Li Tianlan couldn't afford to use this group of people at all. They were either the regional heads of a large force or the ace agents of a country. They were different from the people on Li Tianlan's list. Not to mention Zhou Tong. Even the head of the intelligence agency was neutral before entering the prison. After so many years, their value had basically been squeezed out, and such people were not indispensable in relatively mature forces. Under the right opportunity, Li Tianlan could take them out, and it wouldn't touch the nerves of the parliament of Zhongzhou State. The identity of those ace agents was too sensitive. Even if they had been locked up for many years, Li Tianlan didn't think he could change their stand. The most important thing was that although they were strong, their potential had long been exhausted after being locked up for many years. They weren't worth investing in. As for those who had just come in, they were even less trustworthy. Such people were of little value to Li Tianlan. The current lineup of Emperor Dong's palace was enough to support their expansion. What Li Tianlan needed the most now were these masters who were difficult to completely control. Zhou Tong's class time was about 3 hours a day. After that, Li Tianlan would chat with the other 3 people. The person in charge of the intelligence organization, codenamed Mr. Black, was the focus of his attention recently. Emperor Dong's palace now had its own intelligence organization. But because it had been established for a short time, although it didn't lack resources, it was still a little stiff in operation. Therefore, Mr. Black had already made contact with Xianyuan City and contacted the outside world. When Li Tianlan walked into Mr. Black's dormitory, Mr. Black just hung up the video call from Xianyuan City. When he saw Li Tianlan, he was stunned. Then he stood up and said respectfully, "Your Highness." Li Tianlan nodded. "What are you busy with today?" "I'm studying the current topographic map and future planning of Xianyuan City," Mr. Black said with a smile. "I've recently learned about the situation in Tiannan. Xianyuan City's development prospects are very good. Your Highness wants to set up an intelligence organization. Personally, I think it's secondary to get intelligence on the other side. The first thing we need to do is to make sure we don't lose our own intelligence. Xianyuan City is our base camp. We should be able to see even the slightest movement in Xianyuan City." "Come on," Li Tianlan said slowly. Now the intelligence agency of Emperor Dong's palace was controlled by Tianyin, who had left the purgatory of Heaven capital. As an old man of the Li family, and an old man that Li Tianlan was very familiar with, Li Tianlan never doubted him. Mr. Black nodded. He hesitated for a moment and said softly, "Your Highness, I should be able to find some people from Dark Pupil after I get out. They are also very familiar with Southeast Asia. I don't know if Your Highness needs them. If you do, I can let them join Emperor Dong's palace." The intelligence organization that Mr. He had founded was called the Dark Eye. At its peak, the Dark Eye was a famous intelligence organization in the entire Dark world. After Mr. He was captured, the Dark Eye fell apart, but there were always some experienced backbones who remained loyal to him. No matter how many of them there were, they could increase the intelligence power of Emperor Dong's palace. Li Tianlan said, "Let's talk about it later." He slowly turned around and left Mr. Black's room. The other 2 financial giants were studying the current financial situation. Li Tianlan stopped in front of their door, but he didn't go in. He walked to the gate of the prison. The gate opened slowly. It was dusk in the desert. The light of the setting sun shone on the yellow sand of the desert. It was silent and desolate. Li Tianlan walked to the gate and sat down. He looked at the sky in the distance and said nothing. Only the dark and exquisite Xianyuan sword was slowly rotating around him. Li Tianlan was like a statue. He would come here every day to sit for a while, but what he saw was always the yellow sand and the setting sun. The sun slowly set. Darkness shrouded the desert, and the temperature began to drop. "Your Highness," a clear voice sounded beside Li Tianlan. A touch of delicate fragrance appeared beside Li Tianlan. Xiaoqing, who was brought to the desert prison by her father, Xiao Mahai, before she graduated, quietly sat down beside Li Tianlan. She wore a very pure white dress, and her snow-white calf leaned against Li Tianlan's leg intentionally or unintentionally. Li Tianlan didn't move. He just said yes. "Are you waiting for someone?" Xiaoqing asked carefully. She sat close to Li Tianlan and stared at his side profile. A very attractive blush appeared on the face of the girl who had just turned 20. "No." Li Tianlan shook his head. Xiaoqing thought about it and lit a cigarette for him. She looked at Li Tianlan with a lighter in one hand and her cheek in the other. She whispered, "You look very lonely." "I'm not lonely," Li Tianlan said faintly, "just a little lonely." He looked at the sky in the distance. It was the night and the stars. At night in the desert, heaven and earth seemed to be frozen, without any vitality. "I can." Xiaoqing's face became redder. Her voice trembled with a touch of temptation. "Your Highness, I can accompany you tonight." Li Tianlan glanced at her, shook his head and said, "Let's go eat." Chapter 777. It rarely rained in the desert. The temperature in the prison was slightly lower than usual. Unlike the outside world, raindrops fell from the sky. Most of the raindrops evaporated before they hit the ground. Water vapor drifted in the air, and only a few raindrops fell on Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan sat quietly in front of the desert prison, looking at the distant sky. His heart was as still as water, motionless. When disappointment had become the norm, all the emotions in his heart seemed to gradually turn into numb silence. The sky gradually darkened. The vast expanse of water vapor rose in the air. The darkness swallowed his figure in the night. Li Tianlan reached out and picked up the Xian Yuan sword spinning around him. He reached out and rubbed the delicate blade, his eyes as quiet as the starry sky in the desert. He would sit in front of the prison gate every day for more than a month. At this time, Xiao Mahai, as the warden, would quietly guard near Li Tianlan. Sometimes he would stand for hours or even half a day. He always felt that Li Tianlan was waiting for something. But for more than a month, there was no response from his waiting. Xiao Mahai could not feel Li Tianlan's anger and disappointment, but he could clearly sense that Li Tianlan was getting quieter and quieter, as if he had completely suppressed all his emotions in his heart. The twilight on the horizon disappeared completely. Darkness enveloped the desert. The light in front of the prison gate lit up. Li Tianlan sat on the edge of the light, with his back to Xiao Mahai. His shadow was long in the light, looking lonely and cold. Xiao Mahai looked at his watch and hesitated. Finally, he couldn't help but walk over and whispered, "Your Highness, are you waiting for someone?" "No." Li Tianlan lowered his head and looked at the Xian Yuan sword running between his fingers. His voice was as calm as water. Xiao Mahai gave a hollow laugh. Li Tianlan had been here for more than a year, but Xiao Mahai did not establish a close relationship with him. Instead, he was more in awe of Li Tianlan. Because he had not figured out Li Tianlan's temper, he was naturally more cautious when getting along with him. He looked at the distant sky and whispered, "Then shall we go eat first?" "I'm not hungry." Li Tianlan did not look up. "Old Zhou made a few new dishes today. Your Highness should like them." "No." Li Tianlan stood up and loosened his palm. The Xian Yuan sword rotated slowly around him, like a planet around a star. "I'm going out for a walk," Li Tianlan said. Xiao Mahai was stunned and didn't come back to his senses for a while. Go for a walk. In more than a year, the furthest he had walked was the distance from his dormitory to the prison gate. He had never left the confines of the prison. This was the first time he said he wanted to go out for a walk. By the time Xiao Mahai came to his senses, Li Tianlan had already walked more than 10 meters away. He hesitated for a moment and didn't say anything. He just sighed softly. He still didn't notice Li Tianlan's anger and disappointment, but he could feel that Li Tianlan was in a bad mood. "Dad, where is His Highness going?" Xiaoqing trotted over and asked. "Your Highness is not in a good mood. Let's go for a walk." Xiao Mahai shook his head. "Inform the kitchen to prepare a few dishes that His Highness likes. When he comes back, quickly make another portion." "Oh," Xiaoqing said, watching his back getting farther and farther away. A gust of wind blew in the desert at night. The rain stopped. Water vapor slowly floated all over the sky. As Li Tianlan walked, there seemed to be a thin layer of mist between heaven and earth, vague and indifferent. This picture was very beautiful. Xiaoqing's eyes were a little obsessed. The light behind him faded away and eventually disappeared completely. The white mist full of vitality floated densely, but it didn't affect Li Tianlan's sight at all. The seemingly illusory white mist blocked the yellow sand that was blown up by the wind. Between heaven and earth, there was silence and desolation. Loneliness and boredom seemed to go deep into the bone. Li Tianlan walked forward quietly, with no expression on his face. He didn't know where he was going, nor what he wanted to do. The depression in his heart had changed from the initial torrent to the deep sea, constantly fluctuating in his heart, and even destroying his state of concentration more than once. In more than half a year, his sleep time was getting less and less. The deep meditation on weekdays had almost completely replaced his sleeping time. His will was constantly condensing in meditation, and his swordsmanship was also advancing by leaps and bounds. This kind of practice could hardly be said to be painstaking, but even desperate. No one knew why. Li Tianlan never told anyone that he had dreamed of Qin Weibai countless times in the past 6 months. At first, it was the bits and pieces of their acquaintance. The continuous dreams were long and clear. From the first acquaintance to knowing each other, to the promise to keep each other. Everything, every picture, every word, and every look were constantly repeated in the dream. That figure had really gone deep into the soul, and then began to extend in different directions in the facts of the dream. He dreamed of growing old with Qin Wei Bai. He dreamed of falling out with Qin Wei Bai. He dreamed of parting with Qin Wei Bai. Countless dreams. He would meet many people in the dream, and finally, all of them became Qin Wei Bai. He dreamed that Qin Wei Bai gave birth to a son for him. The dream changed, and the son became a daughter. He dreamed that Qin Wei Bai stood at the top and looked down at the heroes in the world. He dreamed that he passed by Qin Wei Bai countless times and finally became strangers. In the dream, he ignored Qin Wei Bai's struggle and curses, tearing her clothes. On a snowy night, in the vast world of ice and snow, the bright sword blade pierced into his chest. Chaos. Every dream was extremely clear. Every dream had a different ending. The yearning turned into longing, surging up like a tide. Li Tianlan wanted to ask. Why? He wanted to see Qin Wei Bai. He wanted to ask why he couldn't see her. He didn't think there was anything wrong between them. The last time they met, there was no anger or quarrel between them. Then. There was no then. He had called her, but every time it was Horsewoman who answered the phone. Horsewoman either said she was busy or she was not there. Li Tianlan forgot how many times he had called. But Qin Wei Bai never responded. Gradually Li Tianlan also fell silent. For more than a year, the man and woman who used to love each other didn't contact each other even once. He had asked the military counselor this question before. But more than a month later, there was still no answer. He was indeed waiting for someone. But for more than a month, he seemed to be waiting for someone who couldn't wait. Why on earth? Li Tianlan stopped and sat down in the desert. He raised his head and looked at the sky. There was no light in the desert. The shining galaxy above the sky was incomparably bright. Li Tianlan was in a daze. He wrote the 3 words Qin Wei Bai on the yellow sand with his finger. Recalling the bits and pieces of the two of them together, he became more and more silent. Time was passing. The darkness was passing. The desert was silent. It seemed that he was the only one left in the world. The past seemed to have really become the past rooted in his memory. Li Tianlan smiled. He didn't know why, but he just wanted to laugh. I've seen the rainstorm sweep the desert. I've seen the galaxy cover the moonlight. I've seen the dusk chase the dawn. I want to see you. But I can't see you. Why? Li Tianlan gently tapped the Xianyuan sword. Why do you think? The delicate blade of the Xianyuan sword swayed slightly in front of Li Tianlan, as if shaking its head. I'm not happy, Li Tianlan said lightly. The Xianyuan sword circled around Li Tianlan, as if thinking. Its exquisite blade suddenly trembled. A subtle but extremely sharp sword energy appeared in the yellow sand, sweeping away a large area of white fog. At this moment, Li Tianlan clearly sensed a complex and obscure will. It seemed to be a test, but also an inquiry. The Xianyuan sword was eager to have a try. Li Tianlan froze for a moment and laughed. He nodded. Okay. The Xianyuan sword suddenly let out a sword cry. In an instant, the violent sword energy burst out from its delicate blade. At this moment, the desert was no longer lonely. Above the yellow sand, there was soaring fighting intent everywhere. Li Tianlan slowly stood up, looked at the constantly shaking Xianyuan sword, and said calmly, "Make your move." Chapter 778. As the core of the 13th floor, Xianyuan's sword was a weapon, but it was a real weapon with its own life. It had its own thoughts and emotions, and the energy it absorbed on a daily basis could be regarded as its vitality. That kind of thinking could be transmitted through the sword intent. Although it couldn't speak, it could always carry out simple communication with Li Tianlan. The sword was cold. It couldn't comfort people. Or the only comfort it could give Li Tianlan was fighting. After swallowing the 4 murderous weapons, the sword energy of Xianyuan's sword became more majestic and agile. It could be said to be Li Tianlan's best opponent. This was also the road to the invincible realm that Li Tianlan had prepared for himself. Because Xianyuan's sword was a life, But it was also a sword. It was pure enough, so its sword energy was perfect and truly balanced. In other words, with Li Tianlan's current physical state, if Xianyuan's sword broke out with all its strength, it was enough to beat Li Tianlan. You are unhappy, lonely and cold. That's not a problem. I've beaten you once. Why do you still think about those messy things? If one time is not enough, then do it again. That was the idea of Xianyuan's sword. The energy of the 4 murderous weapons was continuously instilled into Xianyuan's sword and transformed into sword energy. Dongqing Wujing consciously strengthened the speed of filling energy for Xianyuan's sword. In this state, Xianyuan's sword could completely press Li Tianlan to the ground and rub him as much as it wanted. Li Tianlan's body straightened. The white mist around him surged wildly and was quickly absorbed by his body. He reached out to Xianyuan's sword. Boom! A roar suddenly broke out in the silent desert. The dark night was almost completely illuminated in an instant. The delicate blade of Xianyuan's sword continued to expand and became a big sword more than 2 meters high. The sword energy flew and rotated, directly enveloping Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan suddenly clenched his fists. The flying yellow sand quickly gathered in the violent sword intent and converged into an extremely slender long sword. Sand gathered into a sword. Li Tianlan held the hilt. The sword energy exploded. In the harsh buzzing sound, his figure disappeared for a moment, and when he reappeared, he was directly in front of Xianyuan's sword. The frenzied sword light soared into the sky. The dazzling light dispelled the night in an instant. The Xianyuan sword rose into the sky, and countless sword chi swirled wildly, turning into a tornado. The tornado completely enveloped Li Tianlan, and the sword chi kept falling from all directions. The sand sword in Li Tianlan's hand was directly smashed by the sword energy. Circumference number in the blink of an eye, the space within 100 meters boiled. Sand and pebbles flew everywhere. Everything in the surroundings was occupied by the sword chi. Without a sword in his hand, Li Tianlan made a gesture with both hands. Myriad limitless seal. The amazing destructive power was still condensing, and the Xianyuan sword in the air had already fallen straight down. The 2-meter-long sword expanded again, turning into a 10-meter-long giant sword. The yellow sand in the sky swirled upward for a moment with Li Tianlan as the center. The Xianyuan sword, surrounded by sword energy, had already appeared beside Li Tianlan. The huge sword rotated slightly. With a dull whistling sound, Li Tianlan's body was sent flying. The huge sword body of the Xianyuan sword kept shaking, and the sound of the sword was endless. In Li Tianlan's sight, the sword light that filled the sky and the earth was getting brighter and brighter, but the range was getting smaller and smaller. The sword energy within a radius of hundreds of meters seemed to be condensing toward the Xianyuan sword. Li Tianlan's body landed on the yellow sand and slowly got up. The invisible sword energy was compressed to the extreme as soon as he stood up. The Xianyuan sword disappeared. A dazzling light spot suddenly burst out from the position of the Xianyuan sword, like a sword light, instantly illuminating the night sky. The light was so dazzling that it could be seen clearly even in the desert prison dozens of miles away. Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes and adjusted his breathing. The huge sword body of the Xianyuan sword had fallen into nothingness in his perception. The dazzling sword light in front of him also seemed to be nothingness. But in the nothingness of the sword light, a clear sound of footsteps slowly rang out. The footsteps were very light, stepping on the yellow sand. There was an indescribable sharpness and danger in the sound. A figure walked out of the sword light, step by step. Li Tianlan's pupils contracted slightly. The Xianyuan sword had disappeared. The one who walked out of the sword light turned out to be another Li Tianlan. Or rather, it was Li Tianlan condensed by the sword energy of the Xianyuan sword. A little interesting. Li Tianlan laughed. Similar to the sword energy doppelganger, Li Tianlan's expression was calm and indifferent. There was no sound, and he was as quiet as a ghost. He raised his palm. It was the move that Li Tianlan was most familiar with. The first blade wuji. The pure and bright sword light suddenly turned into a natural arc of light in his hand. The arc of light flashed and arrived in an instant. Bang! Li Tianlan's feet stepped heavily on the ground, and a loud dragon roar suddenly sounded. The desert within dozens of meters kept roaring, and the yellow sand rising into the sky turned into giant dragons one after another. Li Tianlan's body strode forward and rose into the air. One after another, the giant dragons followed Li Tianlan and rushed forward with the yellow sand all over the sky. The huge arc of sword energy was torn apart by pure force when the giant dragons rose. Li Tianlan's body was getting taller and taller, and his limbs were stretched to the extreme. He fiercely smashed toward his other self on the ground like a cannonball. The fifth blade flying snow. The figure condensed by the sword energy of Xianyuan. Sword rose into the sky. The rain in the desert had stopped not long ago. The water vapor in the sky was constantly condensed in the sword intent. There was a clear sound of condensation in the air. A large area of ice imprisoned a large area of yellow sand dragons. Li Tianlan had landed from the air. Dragon fist flying dragon in the sky. Crack. The huge and thick ice layer was smashed by a punch. The pale lightning burst out from Li Tianlan's body. His figure smashed the ice layer, and the sword energy doppelganger in an instant. The blade of Xianyuan's sword appeared for a moment. Without the slightest hesitation, Li Tianlan directly reached out and grabbed the hilt. Xianyuan's sword, which was about the same size as Li Tianlan, almost instinctively quieted down for a moment. Then it seemed to remember that it was a battle, and the dark sword began to shake violently. Li Tianlan held the hilt tightly. The huge power of the dual wind and thunder veins all fell on Xianyuan's sword. Li Tianlan's figure was as steady as a rock. His face was a little pale, but his smile was extremely happy. I won. Crack. Before he could finish speaking, the exquisite Xianyuan's sword suddenly shattered. The sword energy that seemed to be several times more terrifying than before broke out in an instant. The broken Xianyuan sword directly left Li Tianlan's control. The corner of Li Tianlan's mouth suddenly twitched. Looking at the scene in front of him, he fell completely silent. Xianyuan's sword became an extremely delicate small sword again. The dark sword body floated in the air. But it was not alone. For small sword suddenly appeared beside Xianyuan's sword and slowly rotated around him, like stars surrounding the moon. Li Tianlan looked at the four small swords that suddenly appeared in silence. Every one of them seemed to be familiar, but he didn't know any of them. But every one of them seemed to have an inseparable connection with him now. They floated around Xianyuan's sword and formed a whole. They seemed to be observing Li Tianlan curiously. Li Tianlan was in a trance. At this moment he suddenly thought of a conversation in Yuzhou. The conversation between him and Li Guangtu. Chapter 779. How do you know that I've been to the Wang family of Beihai? If you haven't been to the Wang family of Beihai, how did you get it? You mean this sword is from Beihai? Do you still think it's a sword? You grabbed it and turned it into a sword, and then you can really deceive yourself into thinking that it's your sword? If it's not a sword, what is it? It's not a sword. It's the human emperor. The sword light diffused, the yellow sand fell, and the memory replayed. Li Tianlan seemed to return to the hospital in Yuzhou, facing Li Guangtu who had just woken up. Every single word of the conversation between the two of them resounded clearly in his mind. It's not a sword. It's the human emperor. Li Tianlan lowered his head and looked at the Xianyuan sword in his hand. He thought of Xianyuan Feng shining with eternal light over Mormons. That was the most complete form of Xianyuan sword. Silver moon, Tianguang graceful, azure, horizon twilight, void judgment phantom, magic weapon, East Emperor, Heartbreaker and Xianyuan. When the 13 swords were combined together, it was the complete Xianyuan Feng, which was also the sword formation of the 13-story building. This was an invincible sword formation. Its life, breathing, and every movement were the most perfect sword will. Li Tianlan never knew why Xianyuan Feng had its own life and will. This kind of life and will was so clear and powerful. Holding Xianyuan Feng, in the sword formation of the 13-story building, Li Tianlan really felt that he was facing a living life. The other party could express its own thoughts and will, but it couldn't speak. Such a sword was really a living thing. Li Tianlan had never figured out why, whether in terms of martial arts or modern technology, There was no way to turn a dead thing into a living thing. He used to think that Xian Yuanfeng devoured some murderous weapons, and even the human emperor. But he ignored the fact that devouring itself was something that only living creatures could do. Moreover, he once owned falling stars and blue sky underworld. Although Li Tianlan could also feel the spirituality of these two murderous weapons, it was extremely weak and far from that of Xian Yuanfeng. He didn't think that Xian Yuanfeng could have its own will by devouring the murderous weapons. Until now. Until the scene in front of him appeared. He finally understood why the spirituality of the murderous weapon was so weak, and why Xian Yuanfeng was a complete life form. The spirituality of the murderous weapon was weak. Because of their incompleteness. The 13 murderous weapons in the dark world came from the same piece of metal. That piece of metal was said to be a meteorite from outer space. Its whole body was full of vitality, and in historical records, it was known as the metal of life. The life metal that had been cut into 13 pieces had become a murderous weapon that could have vitality. This is already a miracle. But what if they were whole? What would they be like? Li Tianlan looked at the 5 small swords in front of him. It was as if they had met before, but it was also extremely strange. Li Tianlan raised his palm. A small silver sword surrounding the Xian Yuan sword fell into Li Tianlan's palm. The delicate sword, only the size of a finger, rotated slightly, vaguely conveying a kind of excitement. Li Tianlan grew increasingly silent. Of course he recognized this sword. However, this sword should not have appeared here. This was the Silver Moon Sword. And the Silver Moon Sword was now on the stone of formidable person. This was the second Silver Moon. One after another, small swords appeared in Li Tianlan's hands. The second one was Jade. The second Void. The second one was Verdict. Li Tianlan trembled all over. Beside him, the long broken 13th floor slowly emerged. That was the twilight and grace that originally belonged to the 13th floor. 4 new small swords integrated into the sword formation in the constantly rotating sword energy. The Xian Yuan sword was in front of Li Tianlan. The 13th floor, which originally had only 3 swords left, suddenly became 7 swords. What's going on? Li Tianlan asked. The dark body of the Xian Yuan sword rolled in Li Tianlan's hands, conveying a sense of doubt. It seemed that it did not understand what was going on, and it did not know what to say. It could not speak, but it could play dumb. Li Tianlan did not continue to ask. He thought of the 4 murderous weapons swallowed by the Xian Yuan sword. Falling stars, blue sky underworld, divine light of void, twilight of the gods. It swallowed 4 murderous weapons. It became 4 swords. They were exactly the same as the 13th floor. Li Tianlan could not believe it. But the truth was in front of him. When all the evidence was in front of him. When all the impossibilities were ruled out. The remaining possibility, no matter how absurd it was the truth. The Xian Yuan sword was the human emperor of the Wang family of Beihai. And Xian Yuanfeng. It was the combination of the 13 murderous weapons in the dark world. It was a complete life metal. Li Tianlan recalled the eternal sword that tore the sky above Mormons. He vaguely understood that the sword was indeed the Chosen One's sword, but it was not just the Chosen One's sword. It was also equivalent to the 13 murderous weapons in the dark world firing at the same time. No one could resist that sword. Wang Tianzong could not. Even Dongqing Huangtu, who created the 13th floor, could not resist it. But the problem was that before Xian Yuanfeng, the black world, among the 13 murderous weapons in the dark world, the endless sky was broken, the legend of Qin became a falling star, and the other murderous weapons were kept in the hands of the major forces and countries. How did Xian Yuanfeng come? Was there a second piece of life metal that had not been divided? The invincible sword, Li Tianlan laughed, a little self-deprecating. It seemed that a shortcut suddenly appeared in front of him. Now as long as he took back the 8 swords inserted in the Wang family of Beihai, found Wang Yuetong to take back the broken heart, and brought back Aquamarine from Sai City, the Xian Yuan sword's energy storage speed doubled after swallowing the 4 murderous weapons. As long as the Xian Yuan sword finished storing energy, he would be qualified to directly threaten the Chosen One even if he did not cultivate. What if he collected all the murderous weapons in the dark world? That was equivalent to 2 pieces of life metal to build a sword. How terrible would Xianyuan Feng be at that time? Would the 13th floor become the 26th floor at that time? His mind was a little confused, and he thought of Qin Weibai again. The Xianyuan sword swallowing the 4 murderous weapons was the plan Qin Weibai gave. But why did she hide from him? Li Tianlan's eyes were confused. The Xianyuan sword's blade shook slightly. In an instant, the other 6 swords around Li Tianlan flew out at the same time. The sword energy of the 6 swords filled the sky and turned into 6 Li Tianlans in front of him. The Xianyuan sword shook, conveying a kind of complacent emotion. Li Tianlan took a deep breath, waved his hand and said calmly, "Go back." Crack. In the crisp combination sound, the 7 swords returned to one at the same time and appeared beside Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan held the hilt of the sword. This feeling was a real blood connection. The night was getting darker. Li Tianlan held the sword and turned to the prison. Dawn broke on the horizon. The pale golden sun shone on the desert prison, and the whole desert was golden. Li Tianlan looked at the familiar building with a calm expression. The roar of the helicopter's rotors came from afar. There was no advance notice. Or Li Tianlan didn't receive the notice because he didn't return all night. The helicopter landed slowly in front of the prison gate. In the flying yellow sand, the cabin door opened. A slender figure walked out of the helicopter and saw Li Tianlan, who had walked to the prison gate at first glance. Li Tianlan froze in place and didn't know how to react for a moment. When he had been completely disappointed, the figure that haunted him stood there bathed in the desert morning sunshine. Dreamlike, perfect and flawless. Chapter 780. For some people, no matter where they stood, they were the best scenery. She was like the bright moon in the night sky, the rainbow under the clear sky, and the oasis in the desert. The moment he saw her, Li Tianlan's originally dry and almost lonely heart suddenly became moist. It was not a surprise, but a kind of contented peace. His body slowly relaxed and his eyes softened. Without any hesitation, Qin Weibai trotted into Li Tianlan's arms. She held him tightly with her delicate arms, rubbed her head against Li Tianlan's chest, and said with a soft smile, "Did you miss me?" "Every day." Li Tianlan's voice was hoarse and sounded as light as water. In more than a year, from the boss of the Samsara Palace living in the dark world to the current patriarch of the Lin clan, her dressing style seemed to have changed a lot. The colorful dress on her did not look pompous, but had a kind of beauty that complemented each other. Not everyone, not even the so-called beauty, could control this kind of gaudy color. But in the desert morning wind, she, who was shining with colorful colors, had an indescribable gentleness and nobility. Li Tianlan's palm slid down her long hair, held her slender waist and slightly tightened. Their hearts beat in sync, and they were at ease. "I miss you too. Every day." Qin Weibai took a deep breath and murmured. "Really?" Li Tianlan asked simply. "Are you angry with me?" Qin Weibai looked up at Li Tianlan and whispered. "There are a lot of things in the Lin clan. I didn't mean to hide from you." "How is the Lin clan?" Li Tianlan asked. He thought that he did not have the ability to break the Lin clan's principle of seclusion, but there was no doubt that Lin Fengting's attitude in Eastern Europe had shown a lot of things. At least in the process of the rise of Emperor Dong's palace, he could play an unimaginable role. Lin Fengting was now the #1 expert in the dark world. Although such an ally seemed to stand aloof from the world, absolutely no one dared to despise him. Qin Weibai was silent for a moment, then said with a smile, "It's okay, but the dark world has been a little chaotic recently. Although the Lin clan is secluded, it can't stay out of everything." Li Tianlan let go of Qin Weibai's exquisite and graceful body, took her hand, and walked to the prison gate. He said casually, "Tell me in detail." Qin Weibai did not move. She stood in front of Li Tianlan and opened her arms. Under the sunlight, her bright eyes were a little blurred. She said coquettishly, "I want you to hug me." Li Tianlan moved slightly. He paused for a moment. Qin Weibai looked at Li Tianlan's expression carefully. She had just asked him if he was angry, but the other party directly asked about the Lin clan. "Don't be angry, okay? I won't leave this time. I'll stay here to accompany you." Qin Weibai said softly. Li Tianlan sighed and bent down to carry Qin Weibai's body. The Xianyuan sword shrank again and jumped over Qin Weibai's head as if it was greeting her. Then it hid in the sword formation. After the things in Eastern Europe are over, the dark world is destined to be chaotic. Qin Weibai put her hands around Li Tianlan's neck, and her voice was a little lazy. Because there are too many invincible realm experts dead and injured. Jiang Qiansong, Cass Rotter, Charlemagne Huang Kong, and the seriously injured King Tong and Paul. The superpowers in the dark world are leaderless, and chaos is inevitable. These superpowers represent the interests of many fields. If the invincible realm experts die and there are no invincible realm experts among them, others will naturally target the huge interests represented by these superpowers. The Heroes Club, the Fantasy World, the Shadow Throne, and even the Men in Black. All countries are secretly taking action, hoping to incorporate some of the superpowers. And these forces are also fighting for power. Some forces with invincible realm experts are stirring up trouble. For the time being, they have no foundation. The invincible realm experts who are alone also want to fish in troubled waters. Even the headquarters of the Lin clan has received many requests for cooperation. They all hope that Mr. Lin can take action, and even share half of what you get with the Lin clan. It's really a big deal, but I refused. Qin Weibai bit Li Tianlan's ear. The Lin clan that I control will only have you as an ally. A new invincible realm expert? Who? Li Tianlan asked curiously. Mormon's sword strike was like the clearest dividing line. After that sword strike, the new era had been fully revealed. Most of the older generation of invincible realm experts began to withdraw from the stage. The new invincible realm experts slowly appeared. Saint was the first. Wang Xiaoyao was the second. The third was Dijiang. The invincible realm experts appeared one after another, and it seemed that they were assembling a new divine and holy lists. Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes and whispered, I'm talking about the kind of invincible realm experts who have no background. No background, no national position. This kind of invincible realm expert was undoubtedly the most special and the most precious. He was a figure worthy of being roped in by various countries. Such people rarely appeared in the dark world. In recent decades there were only two, and they were both from Africa. One was Black Ghost. The other was Ramiro. But it turned out that Black Ghost was a pawn of the Jiang family of South America. And there seemed to be other forces behind Ramiro. An invincible realm expert with no background was more precious than a panda in the dark world. It's a killer. His codename is Ju. He's very ambitious. Now he's stirring up trouble in the Shadow Throne. Qin Weibai narrowed her eyes and curled up in Li Tianlan's arms like a cat. In addition, Jiang Guochu of the Jiang family of South America has also broken through. In more than a year after Eastern Europe, there have been 5 invincible realm experts in the dark world. It's lively enough, Li Tianlan whispered. He walked into the prison with Qin Weibai in his arms. Xiao Qing had prepared breakfast and stood outside Li Tianlan's dormitory. Seeing Qin Weibai curled up in Li Tianlan's arms, she was obviously stunned and lost in thought. Breakfast for her. Li Tianlan rubbed Qin Weibai's face with his chin, but he didn't introduce it to Xiao Qing. Okay. Xiao Qing handed the food box to Qin Weibai, and her bright eyes had become extremely dim. Li Tianlan calmly walked into his dormitory with Qin Weibai in his arms. Qin Weibai jumped out of Li Tianlan's arms and said with a chuckle, There's something more lively. What? Li Tianlan asked casually. Qin Weibai opened the food box, took out the dishes inside one by one and said slowly, There's no exact information about the Wang family of Beihai. But according to some information sorted out by the Lin clan, some dark forces seem to have signs of joining forces. Among them, the Vatican and the 2 martial arts sects of East Island are the most active. The Jiang family of South America seems to have taken action. She hesitated, narrowed her eyes and said softly, Wang Xiaoyao of Snow Country seems to have taken action. They want to target the Wang family of Beihai? Li Tianlan was stunned. This is the best chance. Qin Weibai's tone was calm. Different people have different purposes, but many people may want to completely destroy the Wang family of Beihai. Li Tianlan was silent for a while and said softly, "They can't do it. Zhongzhou State must be ready at this time, right?" "What about you?" Qin Weibai looked up at Li Tianlan with a smile. "What are you going to do?" Chapter 781. Standing in the dormitory, Li Tianlan hesitated for a long time. The Wang family of Beihai. No one could deny the strength and glory of the Wang family of Beihai, whether it was the so-called new era or the past era. Li Tianlan had never denied this. Even in his heart, the Wang family of Beihai had always been his most powerful opponent. More than 20 years ago, Kunlun City was the main force that pushed the Li family down from the altar, but Li Tianlan had never taken them seriously. Kunlun City was not weak, but they had too many flaws. The time of rise was too short, the foundation was too poor, and the sense of belonging was too low. More than 20 years were not even enough to establish enough tacit understanding with Zhongzhou State. If Li Tianlan went to the peak, he would not have any pressure to deal with such a force. But the Wang family of Beihai was different. It was a behemoth that was really rooted in Zhongzhou State and the whole dark world. Its power had expanded to such an extent that unless there was an irresistible natural disaster, there was almost no possibility of destruction, at least not in a short time. Otherwise, they would not be qualified to play with Zhongzhou State. Even in this special situation, the Wang family of Beihai could not be destroyed by a few so-called superforces, because Beihai had Zhongzhou State behind it. When the loss of Beihai really touched the bottom line of Zhongzhou State would definitely take action. Zhongzhou State? Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes and suddenly said, "Which forces may attack the Wang family of Beihai?" "It's not sure yet." Qin Weibai took Li Tianlan's hand and asked him to sit at the table. She served him a bowl of porridge and said softly, "At present, only the Lin clan has received some information, and we are just speculating. The Vatican, the Jiang family of South America, Jifeng Sword Reigning School, and Wuji Palace, to be exact the royal family of East Island, their recent actions are very obvious. But the Wang family of Beihai has not noticed this." "The Wang family of Beihai has not noticed this?" Li Tianlan was thoughtful. Even the Wang family of Beihai had not noticed it, so how did the Lin clan receive the news? "The information comes not only from the Lin clan, but also from military counselor. Although Samsara Palace is gone, the intelligence system we built is still working. For some special reasons, our infiltration of the Wang family of Beihai is the most successful. About half a month ago, Jifeng Sword Reigning School took the lead in sending a group of spies into Beihai province. A group of spies infiltrated the North Sea province. After that, Wuji Palace and the East Island royal family also responded, followed by the Vatican and the Jiang family of South America. These forces all have experts of the invincible realm. The reason why these spies could avoid the sight of the Wang family of Beihai was that Wang Xiaoyao of Snow Country secretly did something to help them hide their identities. Wang Xiaorao. Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes, and a touch of mockery flashed in the depths of his eyes. "When I first saw him, I really didn't see that he was so ambitious." Qin Weibai wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. In the end, she smiled and said, "Who can tell?" Before Wang Xiaoyao went to Eastern Europe, everyone thought that Wang Tianzong and Wang Xiaoyao were very close. After all, they were brothers. Wang Tianzong was really good to his younger brother, and never guarded against him. When the old patriarch of the Wang family died, Wang Xiaoyao was less than 10 years old. Wang Tianzong brought him up completely by himself. The elder brother was like a father. Wang Xiaorao made a lot of trouble for Sword Emperor, and offended many people for him. One of them was a top big shot in the Southeast group. What was more ironic was that the top big shot of the Southeast group that Wang Tianzong offended, because of his younger brother, was now a supporter of Wang Qinglei, or Wang Xiaoyao. No one could have thought that the two brothers would go to this step. And no one could have thought that a real ungrateful person would appear in the Wang family of Beihai in such a weak situation. He helped the spies of the hostile forces to lurk in his own family. This was completely to fight for power and profit, and it was clear that he was a traitor. Li Tianlan thought of his first meeting with Wang Xiaoyao in Huading Garden, and shook his head slightly. Are these the forces? Li Tianlan asked. In the Vatican, there was Moraid, an expert who was infinitely close to the peak of the invincible realm. Jiang Guochu of the Jiang family of South America broke through the invincible realm. Jifeng Sword Raining School had East Island's great grandmaster Yagyu Kuromi. And Tianhai Wuji, the palace master of Wuji Palace, was recognized as the #1 expert in East Island before the appearance of the Purgatory of Heaven capital for invincible realm experts. For today's Wang family of Beihai, it was definitely a real big trouble. But could they destroy the Wang family of Beihai? Li Tianlan took it as a joke. What's the attitude of Zhongzhou state? Li Tianlan asked softly. There is no clear information now. Zhongzhou state and Beihai don't know. In Qin Weibai's tone, there was a deep meaning. Even if they know, I'm afraid they will pretend not to know at first. Sure enough, Li Tianlan's heart moved, and he suddenly realized that Qin Weibai's words meant something. Even if they know? He asked rhetorically. Qin Weibai sipped the porridge. Her movements were elegant and beautiful, and she didn't speak. Even if they knew, it was not an assumption. For this kind of thing, Zhongzhou state might or might not know now. But now it showed that they didn't know. Li Tianlan took a deep breath and confirmed his thoughts again. Most likely, the trouble that the Wang family of Beihai was about to face this time had the shadow of Zhongzhou state. At least there was the shadow of Wang Qinglei. Wang Xiaorao had taken action, so it was impossible for Wang Qinglei not to know the news. Even all this might be planned by Wang Qinglei. If this was the case, how could Zhongzhou state not know? But now they kept silent. Obviously, the parliament of Zhongzhou state now hoped that the Wang family of Beihai would be chaotic. The more chaotic, the better. Their goal was clear as day. Only when the Wang family of Beihai was in complete chaos under the impact of the superpowers, Zhongzhou state would take action and wipe out everything. When the power of Zhongzhou state officially entered Beihai to help stabilize the situation in Mount Dibing, it would be very difficult to let them out. It's not just these superpowers I mentioned. These are just the planners. I'm sure that when they really put it into action, there will be more forces invading the Wang family of Beihai. The Wang family of Beihai has occupied the position of the first power in the dark world for too long, and it has countless enemies. When there is a chance someone will take the lead, and all the forces, big and small, will emerge. It's not just the tradition of Zhongzhou state to beat the dog when it's down. Is the parliament so confident that Zhongzhou state can completely control the situation? Li Tianlan thought of all kinds of possibilities and shook his head subconsciously. Not to mention anything else, the 4 invincible realm experts were not easy to deal with. Where did the parliament get the confidence? Don't we have you? Qin Weibai laughed. When everything happens, the parliament will definitely send someone to find you. She looked at Li Tianlan. Or to ask you to go out and clean up the mess. That's why I asked you what to choose. You're tuning in to the Echoes of the Heart YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.